Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly into the cool marble corridors of Olympus, where the air feels heavy with incense, polished stone, and unspoken tension. You're standing beside towering columns veined with gold, watching clouds slide lazily past balconies that overlook the mortal world. Somewhere nearby, thunder murmurs, low, distant, familiar, and you already sense that living here means never fully relaxing. This is divine marriage, after all. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this relationship dynamic for more than a week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and drop a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly, barefoot on cool stone, toward the central throne room. To your left is Zeus's seat, massive, loud even when empty, practically vibrating with authority. To the right is Hera's throne, just as grand, just as elevated, but quieter, more controlled, and somehow heavier. This is where you begin to understand that Hera is not merely Zeus's wife. She is the institution of marriage itself, sitting upright, composed, and eternally alert. The mainstream historical fact you should keep in mind as you stand here is this. In ancient Greek religion, Hera was worshipped primarily as the goddess of marriage, lawful union, and legitimate lineage. Not love, not passion, marriage, contracts, vows, structure. She predates Zeus in many cult traditions, and some historians still argue whether Hera began as a powerful independent deity, later absorbed into Zeus's patriarchal hierarchy. You watch her now as she adjusts the folds of her robe with meticulous care. Everything about her posture says order, control, expectation. She doesn't fidget. She doesn't sigh. She simply exists in a constant state of dignified readiness, as if the next humiliation could arrive at any moment. And statistically speaking, it probably will. This is the everyday life of Hera, vigilance disguised as grace. A quirky, fringed tidbit whispers through the myths as you observe her more closely. Some lesser-known traditions claim Hera bathes daily in the spring of Knossos to renew her virginity, not in the physical sense, but symbolically, restoring herself after the endless erosions of betrayal. You imagine her slipping away at dawn, not to escape Zeus, but to reclaim herself before the day begins. It's less about purity and more about survival. You feel it now, the tension between role and self. Hera's marriage is not optional. It is cosmic infrastructure. If she leaves Zeus, marriage itself fractures. Lineage collapses. Legitimacy dissolves. Olympus becomes chaos, with better outfits. Historians still argue whether Hera's jealous rage reflects misogynistic storytelling or a coded expression of women's power constrained by ancient social structures. Standing here, watching her reign beside a husband who cannot stop straying, you sense that the truth is deeply uncomfortable and probably both. Zeus enters the chamber with the confidence of someone who has never faced consequences he couldn't thunder his way out of. He smiles. The room adjusts itself to his presence. Hera doesn't move. She doesn't need to. Her stillness is its own counterforce. You notice that she never confronts him immediately. She waits. Hera is not impulsive jealousy. She is slow, accumulating consequence. This is where modern audiences often get her wrong. Hera isn't angry all the time. She's patient, calculating, enduring. Her anger is archival. As the day unfolds, you trail her through Olympus, learning that divine marriage is not about affection but optics. Hera oversees rituals, receives petitions from minor deities, and ensures that unions, mortal and immortal, follow proper form. Her domain is ceremony and expectation. She corrects posture, adjusts seating, ensures names are spoken correctly. These details matter because legitimacy lives in details. A nymph bows too casually. Hera raises an eyebrow. Lesson learned. You begin to understand something quietly devastating. Hera's jealousy isn't a flaw. It's a symptom. The endless cycle begins here. Not with rage, but with duty. With showing up. With staying seated beside the thunderer no matter how many times the ground shakes. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoes. Probably Zeus again, charming someone new. Hera's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. You catch it because you're watching closely now. This is how it always starts. Not with fury, with restraint. And as you follow her back toward the throne, the marble cold beneath your feet, you realize you're not just witnessing a divine marriage. You're standing inside a system designed to repeat itself forever. Quietly, elegantly, painfully, the cycle has begun. You wander further into Olympus, your steps falling lightly on marble that has never known erosion, though the edges of columns are scratched with tiny marks. Reminders of centuries of careless sandals or perhaps minor quarrels. The air smells faintly of honey, fresh stone, and something floral you cannot name, something wild, untamed, and somehow both edible and dangerous. As you pause at a terrace overlooking a grove of golden olive trees, you begin to understand what it means that the gods' homes are not just palaces but ecosystems, carefully curated to reflect hierarchy, taste, and eternal comfort. The mainstream fact you notice immediately is that the ancient Greeks imagined each god's palace as a perfect reflection of their personality. Apollo's sunlit halls full of instruments, Athena's workshops of bronze and clay, Hera's private gardens arranged in exact geometric precision. These were not merely decorative. They signaled status, mood, and expectation. You glance at the golden columns supporting a nearby hall. Tiny reliefs depict everyday disputes among the gods, someone spilling nectar, a quarrel over music notes, a subtle jab that might escalate into centuries of grudges. It's meticulous, obsessive, and oddly relatable. And here comes the quirky tidbit. Some sources describe Zeus's throne as having a special mechanism that occasionally rattles to remind him of accountability, like a divine, nagging seat. You try to imagine an immortal being startled by furniture, and a small laugh escapes you. The gods' lives, for all their grandeur, are punctuated by little eccentricities that make them far more human than you anticipated. Historians still argue whether these depictions were aspirational or satirical. Were the Greeks modeling Olympus as an ideal of governance or mocking their own elite? You feel the tension of that debate as you drift deeper, observing the way servants, nymphs, minor deities, spirits, move with quiet precision, attending to tasks that might seem trivial to a mortal but are monumental here. You notice a young nymph carrying a crystal pitcher of ambrosia. Her movements are fluid, effortless. Yet there is a subtle strain in her posture that speaks to repetition over centuries. The courtyard before you opens into a broader plaza lined with fountains, each feeding a basin that shimmers like liquid diamond. Water flows not by gravity alone, but by divine will, bending and shaping itself according to the whims of whoever lords over this particular section. One fountain seems to whisper as you approach, singing a tune that almost feels familiar, like a lullaby half-remembered. Apollo's influence, no doubt. You can hear the faint strumming of a lyre somewhere nearby, though no musician is visible. Music here is more than art. It's infrastructure, a constant hum threading through the lives of all Olympus's residents. You wander along a colonnade where sunlight dances across the polished marble, and you begin to notice the subtle layers of attention required to keep Olympus functional. Messengers pass, occasionally colliding mid-air in a barely contained chaos of wings and feathers. You spot Hermes darting overhead, delivering messages with a grin so wide it seems almost mischievous, even for a god. You follow a few of his messages in your mind, imagining secrets and gossip tumbling down to mortals far below, or perhaps to gods with long memories and long grudges. There is an understated tension in the architecture itself. Palaces are connected by terraces and bridges, but some corridors are narrow, some doors are slightly misaligned, some stairs curve unnaturally. You realize these are not flaws. They are subtle signals. They dictate movement, proximity, and influence. Olympus is designed to manage not just space, but relationships, alliances, and potential conflicts. A misplaced step could deliver you to the wrong gathering, the wrong argument, or an overheard revelation. You drift toward a small grove where potted laurels and delicate olive saplings grow. Hera is visible in the distance, her robe flowing like water over steps. Her attention is divided between tending to her private gardens and issuing quiet, exacting instructions to attendants. Even minor actions carry weight here. A glance from Hera can bless or condemn, inspire loyalty or stir jealousy. You note a few small gestures, tucking a stray branch here, adjusting a basin there, that seem inconsequential yet radiate authority. Apollo glides past, leaving faint ripples in the air, and you feel the tug of divine attention even if it's unintentional. Music flows behind him. Even his absence from the courtyard leaves traces, like echoes of an unfinished song. The fringe tidbit? Some myths suggest Apollo's footsteps can accelerate plant growth, a poetic exaggeration perhaps, but as you watch the olive saplings bend subtly as he passes, you can't help but wonder. The mountain feels alive in ways you are only beginning to perceive. The day is growing warmer, though the sun has only begun its climb. Marble surfaces radiate gentle heat. The air smells of faintly baked honey, flowers, and the metallic tang of bronze. You notice that each palace has its own microclimate, carefully curated, a sort of divine feng shui that accommodates the personal preferences of immortals. Athena's workshop is cooler, shaded with olive branches. Apollo's terraces are warm, sunny, and filled with sound. It is a subtle orchestration of comfort and hierarchy. As you explore further, you notice that the gods' interactions are almost choreography. Each movement, gesture, and glance communicates layers of information. You pass a minor goddess who pauses to straighten a column, only to nod at someone you cannot see. There is a rhythm here, a social meter, that keeps centuries of memory in alignment. Historians still argue whether these depictions of divine routine reflect practical social observations or pure imagination. But standing here, you sense that human psychology has deeply informed every stone, every decoration, every routine. At the center of the plaza, a large fountain glows faintly with ambrosia. Servants polish it tirelessly. You observe a curious ritual. Water from the fountain is carefully splashed on the marble edges, creating miniature rainbows that shift as the sun climbs. Quirky, yes, but functional too. It subtly warns if anyone approaches uninvited. You cannot help but think of it as the world's first security system. The air vibrates with energy as you move past another terrace where Aphrodite is arranging flowers with precise, careful attention. Beauty here is obligation as well as pleasure. Her daily routine includes managing reputation, influence, and the subtleties of admiration. A joke surfaces in your mind. If you thought Instagram influencers were demanding, try doing it for eternity. She notices your gaze and smiles faintly, not at you exactly, but through you, as if assessing your suitability to exist in the same narrative. Ares strides past somewhere in the distance, restless, arms flexing as if in constant preparation for conflict. Even in peace, his energy radiates, creating a tension that hums in the air. You understand that Olympus is not static. Its calm moments are interludes, and under the surface, desires, ambitions, and grudges flow like hidden rivers. You drift toward the palace of Zeus himself, feeling a subtle change in atmosphere. Authority manifests invisibly, but undeniably. Messengers move with more urgency, minor gods pause in mid-conversation, and the soft murmur of debate rises above the usual morning sounds. Even the sunlight seems brighter here, as if Zeus commands it to spotlight the courtyard. It is not intimidation exactly. It is the gravity of leadership, woven into every surface. As you pause on a balcony, looking out over the golden terraces and delicate groves, you catch a glimpse of the mountain itself. Clouds roll lazily over its shoulders, shadows shift with a slow, deliberate grace. You realize Olympus is as much a creature as a residence. Every garden, every fountain, every sunbeam is curated, tended, and, in a sense, alive. Fringe tales claim the mountain itself judges newcomers, and for the first time, you feel the truth of that notion. By mid-morning, Olympus is in full swing. Music, conversation, and movement converge into a subtle symphony of immortal activity. Even the smallest actions, the placement of a pitcher, the arrangement of a pedal, the flick of a wrist, carry meaning, signaling alliances, preferences, or warnings. You sense that a single misstep could disrupt the delicate balance of centuries. And here you are, an intruder of sorts, observing rhythms perfected over countless ages. The everyday life of the gods is not loud thunderbolts or apocalyptic battles. It is quiet, relentless, endlessly curated motion. Each terrace, hallway, and fountain tells a story of hierarchy, desire, and eternal attention. You feel the weight, the fascination, and the strange comfort of it all. You notice a subtle shift as you move toward the central palace. The air grows heavier, charged with the kind of presence that can only belong to Zeus himself. The sun tilts slightly as if acknowledging authority, though the light here bends in ways mortals would never comprehend. A faint scent of ozone lingers, the prelude to storms that may or may not come. You take a careful step forward, aware that Olympus's ruler is already active, probably inspecting routines, listening for missteps, and, most importantly, asserting his invisible but undeniable dominance. This is not just hierarchy, it is atmosphere made tangible, a gravitational pull that bends the daily life of all who dwell here. The morning has ripened into the busy stillness of Olympus's own peculiar schedule. Zeus's attendants move with precision, carrying polished thunderbolt replicas for inspection, adjusting ceremonial drapes, and whispering in tones designed not to distract, but to demonstrate obedience. You are reminded of a mundane office inspection on steroids, but in slow motion and entirely more consequential. The mainstream historical fact: Homer frequently depicts Zeus as the enforcer of cosmic order, mediator of disputes, and occasional instigator of divine drama. It is his attention alone that structures the rhythm of the mountain, setting the tempo for gods and spirits alike. A quirky tidbit emerges as you observe a small ritual near the throne. One of Zeus's attendants carefully arranges a collection of lightning-shaped symbols in a precise pattern each morning. Ancient writers sometimes describe these as mock lightning for meditation, small tokens that help the king focus on his vast responsibilities. You can't help but marvel at the absurdity. Imagine having a full empire of immortals to manage, and still needing tiny, symbolic props to keep yourself aligned. Historians still argue whether Zeus's depictions as both stern ruler and indulgent father figure were intended as moral lessons or merely reflections of human leadership anxieties. You feel this tension as you watch minor quarrels suddenly quiet at the sound of approaching footsteps. Even a small dispute among river spirits halts when Zeus's presence is sensed, a subtle demonstration of influence, like ripples on a pond. The god himself is not immediately visible, and yet you feel him in every movement, every pause, every shadow. He walks somewhere behind closed doors, and each step resonates through the palace, carrying centuries of expectation. You glance at the polished floor beneath your feet and imagine the countless sandals that have trodden these halls, the tiny imprints of immortality layered over each other, invisible yet persistent. There is a rhythm here, a repetition that is both comforting and slightly oppressive. You drift into an open gallery lined with murals depicting cosmic disputes, titans defeated, mortals elevated, cities rising and falling under divine observation. One mural catches your eye, a strangely playful depiction of Zeus, tossing lightning bolts at a distant hill, not in anger but seemingly in mild boredom. Fringe sources suggest that this particular image was meant to be humorous, a wink at the gods, occasionally petty tendencies. You chuckle quietly, realizing Olympus's immortals have a sense of humor that spans eons. Nearby, a minor deity, perhaps a messenger of some minor river or grove, tips a vase to prevent a spill, and you notice the tiny precision required in even mundane acts. Every movement carries weight. You brush against a column and feel the hum of enchantment embedded in the stone. Olympus is alive, not biologically but magically, socially, and psychologically. The mountain itself seems to respond to attention, approving or mildly scolding with subtle tremors. Morning rituals continue around you. Zeus's breakfast, if you can call it that, is a measured affair. Ambrosia, nectar, and conversation that carries the weight of policy. Minor gods hover in the background, listening for instructions, observing tones, and recording gestures. You notice a pattern. Even casual words here are contracts, the weight of eternity lending gravity to ordinary speech. A fringe tidbit? Some myths suggest Zeus sometimes practices mock thunderbolts during breakfast, hurling harmless bolts at decorative columns to train reflexes or simply amuse himself. You stifle a laugh. Training with dangerous toys seems oddly relatable, even for immortals. You pause to watch as the sunlight falls across the throne room, catching a prism of gold and ivory. Every surface is meticulously maintained, not out of vanity but obligation. The mainstream fact: Greek myths emphasize Zeus's control, not only over divine entities but also the natural world. Storms, weather, and celestial order respond to his mood and decisions. Standing here, you can almost feel the invisible connections. The mountain responds, the wind listens, the birds pause mid-song. And yet, for all the structure, you notice hints of chaos, tiny anomalies that refuse strict control. A dove flutters into the room unexpectedly. A shadow shifts where it shouldn't. Hermes zips past, grinning in defiance of timing. This is the balance that makes Olympus dynamic. Absolute authority tempered by inevitable unpredictability. Historians still argue whether these narrative choices were meant to mirror human governance or purely to entertain. But you sense both truths at once. Zeus eventually emerges into view, not in a blaze of divine light, but with quiet gravitas. His robe falls perfectly, a subtle echo of the clouds outside. He is both commanding and accessible, a paradox made flesh or immortal. You notice how the air seems to bend around him, how even the minor echoes of his movement adjust the rhythm of the palace. You are keenly aware that the mountain's daily order depends on his presence, a hum of authority woven into the air itself. As you observe, minor tensions begin to play out naturally. Ares paces somewhere beyond the hall, his energy palpable even at a distance. Aphrodite rearranges flowers in the sunlight, her movements precise, calculated, yet effortlessly graceful. Even the smallest gestures carry meaning, and you begin to appreciate the invisible choreography Olympus requires. Every glance, every sigh, every breath is a message, a signal, a tiny thread in a tapestry that has been weaving for millennia. You follow Zeus's gaze as he gestures toward a fountain. The water shimmers unnaturally, responding almost telepathically. Ambrosia droplets float mid-air before settling gently back into the basin. Fringe sources suggest that Olympus itself might be semi-conscious, responding to the emotional and practical rhythms of its occupants. You feel the plausibility of this as the mountain hums faintly beneath your feet, vibrating with the pulse of daily life. You wander toward the gallery where minor gods gather, recording events, offering counsel, and mediating disputes. Even these activities are governed by protocol. Who speaks first? How gestures are made? Which words are acceptable? The mundane becomes ceremonial. You feel a pang of recognition. It is not unlike human office politics, only magnified by immortality, eternal observation, and the weight of cosmic consequence. Sunlight now floods the courtyard, revealing the geometry of Olympus. Each palace aligns with sightlines, fountains, terraces, and gardens in precise ratios. There is beauty in function, a system designed to manage influence, proximity, and hierarchy. You move along shaded corridors, noting subtle divisions. Who has access to certain halls? Who may cross paths? Who is deliberately kept apart? Even minor misalignments could create unintended tension. By mid-morning, you realize that Zeus's breakfast and casual oversight have set the tempo for the mountain. Messengers dart, conversations hum with energy, and minor squabbles simmer without boiling over. You feel the rhythm now, a combination of meticulous control and the inevitable unpredictability of personalities, immortal or otherwise. Fringe sources describe this as a divine ballet of authority, and you understand why. Every movement is a note in a centuries-old composition. As you pause near the edge of the central terrace, looking out at distant valleys and hills that seem almost miniature from this height, you feel the weight of eternity pressing gently against you. Olympus is alive, yes, but it is also eternal routine. The everyday life of Zeus, and by extension the mountain itself, is not chaos, but carefully managed momentum. Observing it is exhilarating, disorienting, and quietly exhausting all at once. Hera glides into view before you can quite register her presence, and immediately the atmosphere changes. Where Zeus commands with authority that reverberates, Hera rules with subtle insistence, a soft but unyielding force that structures Olympus in ways you might not notice until too late. Her robes ripple like slow waves, embroidered with symbols of peacock feathers and lilies, each telling a story, a warning, or a celebration. She moves with measured grace, adjusting a vase here, straightening a pillar there, not for display but as an exercise of quiet dominion. Even among immortals, some powers are felt more than they are shouted, and Hera is masterful at this. The mainstream fact to note here is that in Greek mythology, Hera is the goddess of marriage, fidelity, and family, and much of her divine work revolves around monitoring relationships, both mortal and divine. Today, you watch as she subtly surveys the palace grounds, her eyes lingering on minor interactions, weighing gestures, and storing tiny details for future reference. Every laugh, every whispered comment is a data point. Every misstep a potential lesson for centuries to come. And there's a quirky detail you can't ignore. Some sources suggest that Hera occasionally tested Zeus's attention and patience by rearranging the furniture of Olympus mid-morning, just to see whether he noticed. You can imagine him grumbling silently as he lifts his gaze from celestial correspondence, only to find a column slightly askew or a cushion displaced. It is both adorable and terrifying. Divine nagging, elevated to cosmic proportions. Historians still argue whether Hera's mythological portrayals reflect the social anxieties of women in ancient Greek society or a more symbolic representation of relational power. Watching her, you feel a little of both. The mountain seems to respond to her moods as subtly as it does to Zeus's, bending terraces, guiding sunlight, and influencing the placement of attendants almost unconsciously. You follow her lightly, careful not to interrupt, as she steps into a small courtyard where the gardens are arranged with near mathematical precision. Flowers bloom on cue, their petals turning toward the light she controls with a mere glance. The attendants carry baskets of ambrosia, nectar, and exotic fruit, moving in quiet procession. Even minor adjustments, A leaf repositioned, a branch pruned, carry meaning. It's part art, part diplomacy, part invisible administration. A small quarrel bubbles nearby. Two minor goddesses, nymphs, probably, disagree about the proper alignment of a statue's base. Hera approaches without a word, her gaze so steady and deliberate that the disagreement dissolves without intervention. It is a lesson in authority. She does not command loudly, she commands with the sheer inevitability of observation. Fringe tales suggest that a mere glance from Hera could instill compliance across Olympus. A poetic exaggeration, perhaps, but you feel the weight of her presence all the same. As you wander past the courtyard, you notice subtle interactions elsewhere. Hermes zipping by, a glance shared between Aphrodite and Apollo, minor deities whispering messages to each other. You realize that Hera is aware of all of it, not necessarily in detail, but in principle. She monitors the patterns, the currents of influence, the tides of desire and conflict that flow across Olympus. Even in her silence, she participates in shaping the day. Breakfast for Hera is less conspicuous than Zeus's, but equally ritualized. A simple arrangement of ambrosia and fruit sits on a low pedestal. She touches nothing until the attendants have finished their preliminary tasks, adjusting cups, smoothing cloths, and aligning utensils. A mundane action to a mortal eye, but a divine affirmation of control and order. You sense her satisfaction in these precise movements. There is a calm efficiency here, an orchestrated elegance that is quietly imposing. The day's first arguments among immortals are already brewing quietly. Minor gods test boundaries, flirt with rules, and subtly push the limits of etiquette. Hera's interventions are almost invisible, but effective. A tilt of the head, a slight arch of a brow, and the mood shifts imperceptibly. You watch a minor god suddenly realize he's overstepped, correcting himself with a sheepish glance. The power of suggestion, amplified across eternity, is her subtle weapon. You catch a glimpse of Zeus observing from a balcony, probably amused by Hera's orchestrations. Their dynamic is endlessly fascinating. Zeus with grand gestures, boisterous authority, and occasional indulgence. Hera with precision, observation, and the capacity to influence without apparent effort. Fringe anecdotes even suggest they sometimes engage in playful pranks, testing each other's patience while maintaining the stability of Olympus. It is less a marital quarrel than a millennia-long negotiation of balance and respect. Moving closer to Hera, you notice how her influence extends even to the environment itself. The wind seems softer where she passes, carrying the scent of flowers and faint ozone, while the sunlight tilts gently to illuminate the courtyards in her favor. Ancient sources rarely describe this, but fringe accounts suggest the mountain itself bends to her mood. You feel it now. Even Olympus, with all its permanence, responds to her presence. A servant adjusts a golden basin, and Hera offers the subtlest nod of approval. That single gesture sets a cascade of actions into motion. Flowers are rearranged, fountains are tuned, doors subtly shifted. You realize that nothing here happens by chance. The flow of the day is orchestrated through layered attention, subtle authority, and perpetual observation. Even minor gods learn the language of influence from watching her, absorbing lessons in silent negotiation and gentle dominance. You move toward a terrace where the light is warmer, streaming through a lattice of carved marble. Birds, real and enchanted, chirp in delicate counterpoint. Hera watches them for a moment, noting their arrangement, their patterns. This attention to small details is another aspect of her daily power. Minor actions resonate through centuries, shaping the rhythms of Olympus in ways both visible and invisible. Historians still argue whether such mythic details were intended to teach ethics, social etiquette, or simply to create vivid narrative imagery, but standing here, you sense the truth of their functional purpose. By mid-morning, Hera's influence has threaded through courtyards, corridors, and terraces. You feel it subtly. The mountain breathes differently, attention flows predictably, and minor squabbles evaporate before they escalate. It is not magic alone that sustains this rhythm. It is the careful exercise of awareness, authority, and subtle intervention. You realize that Olympus's harmony depends as much on observation and restraint as on power and thunderbolts. Finally, you pause near a reflective pool, where the sun glitters on perfectly still water. You catch Hera's reflection and, alongside it, a faint image of yourself, tiny and mortal, yet oddly integrated into the scene. The everyday life of Hera is precise, deliberate, and enduring, part ritual, part leadership, part invisible choreography. Watching her, you feel the complexity and quiet majesty of Olympus in motion, a balance that is both delicate and eternal. You follow Athena quietly as she moves into her workshop, a space that hums with purpose and careful order. The air is cooler here, shaded by olive branches and dotted with soft sunlight filtering through latticed windows. Tools of craft, chisels, looms, brushes, and tablets are arranged with precise geometry, and you sense immediately that this is a place where thought and action merge seamlessly. Athena does not rush. Her movements are deliberate, each gesture measured, each breath part of an ongoing rhythm that has been practiced for centuries. You realize that intelligence here is not abstract. It is kinetic, tangible, and almost physically present in the workshop. The mainstream historical fact: Athena is the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and craft. Ancient texts consistently describe her as the planner, the thinker, the divine artisan who balances logic, warfare, and innovation. In Homeric epics and later myth, she frequently assists heroes, teaching skills and offering guidance that shapes human history. You observe this in miniature here in the way Athena tends to minor creations, tiny sculptures, intricate weavings, and carefully drafted diagrams, preparing for interventions in both mortal and immortal affairs. A quirky detail emerges as you watch her at work. Fringe myths suggest Athena occasionally invents devices or tools simply to amuse herself or test the ingenuity of others, such as bronze automatons that mimic human actions. Some of these creations are rumored to have minor consciousness, wandering the halls of Olympus when she is absent. You catch the shadow of one in a corner, its movements eerily lifelike, and can't help but smile at the blend of ingenuity and whimsy that seems inseparable from her presence. Historians still argue whether Athena's role in Greek culture was primarily instructional, inspirational, or symbolic of an idealized intellect. Standing here, in her tangible workshop, you feel all three coexisting: the tools, the artifacts, and the meticulous attention to detail demonstrate both the narrative need for wisdom in myth and the cultural admiration for skill and intelligence in human society. Athena lifts a chisel and begins to shape a small statue. Each tap resonates through the cool air, a steady rhythm that seems to echo across the terrace outside. You watch the marble yield to her touch, understanding that skill here is a combination of patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of potential. The statue is small, almost insignificant in scale, yet you sense it embodies layers of meaning: a lesson for mortals, a test for immortals, and a manifestation of thought made material. Nearby, a loom hums softly, threads of gold and silver glinting in the sunlight. Athena adjusts a pattern with subtle care, altering a single strand to perfect the overall design. Fringe accounts suggest these textiles are not merely decorative. They encode strategies, moral lessons, or secret messages. Imagine wearing a garment that literally teaches philosophy or warns of political shifts. You smile at the absurdity and brilliance of it. The minor deities in the workshop move in a quiet ballet around her, passing tools, fetching materials, and recording minute details of process. Their movements are precise, almost invisible in their diligence, yet integral to the function of the space. You notice the flow of attention. Everything Athena touches or observes becomes subtly enhanced, corrected, or imbued with significance. Even a slight misalignment is silently amended. It is a lesson in mindfulness, consistency, and the invisible power of oversight. Athena pauses for a moment and surveys her surroundings, adjusting a sculpture, touching a painting, tilting a tablet for better light. This is her meditation, her method of aligning herself with the mountain, the day, and the ongoing needs of Olympus. You realize that her work is not separate from the life of the gods. It is woven into it, influencing strategies, relationships, and even the outcomes of distant mortal conflicts. Fringe myths suggest she sometimes plants clever ideas in human minds via these creations, a quiet intervention with ripples that last centuries. You notice subtle tensions among the minor deities as they move, communicating silently through gestures and expressions. Athena's calm presence mediates these interactions without apparent effort, shaping behavior through observation and expectation rather than overt command. The mainstream fact is that she often acted as a strategist and mediator in myth, resolving disputes and guiding mortals and gods alike toward desired outcomes. Watching her now, you see how these legendary roles translate into daily life on Olympus, managing small-scale conflicts, balancing skill, and directing attention where it is most effective. The workshop smells faintly of polished wood, clay, and the subtle tang of metal, a combination both grounding and slightly intoxicating. You linger near a basin filled with water for sculpting, noticing how she dips her hands to test consistency and texture. It is a ritual, a small demonstration of precision and mindfulness repeated endlessly. Fringe sources suggest she sometimes uses these gestures to send subtle signals to other gods, invisible yet immediately understood by those attuned to her rhythm. You begin to appreciate the layers of communication, both explicit and silent, that define life here. Athena moves to a corner of the workshop where small models of city layouts rest on tables. She studies them, adjusting roads, positioning buildings, and aligning defensive walls. Mainstream mythology consistently portrays her as a city protector, guiding urban planning and fortifications. You watch as she touches a model, and subtly, you feel the echo of order extend across the terraces of Olympus itself. Her attention organizes not just matter, but behavior, reinforcing patterns that will ripple across both divine and mortal worlds. A minor god pauses to offer a suggestion on a weaving pattern. Athena listens, tilts her head thoughtfully, then makes a minor adjustment, a gentle affirmation of collaboration. Fringe myths suggest she sometimes allows minor deities creative freedom, only to later incorporate their innovations into larger projects, a subtle encouragement of ingenuity that simultaneously reinforces her authority. You feel the nuance. Leadership here is not about control alone, but about guiding creativity in perpetuity. The day advances, and the sun angles more sharply through the lattice, illuminating threads, chisels, and basins in a warm glow. You notice shadows stretching across the floor, aligning perfectly with the placement of tools and materials, a detail perhaps intentional, perhaps incidental, but part of the constant, almost imperceptible orchestration of space and time. Historians still argue whether such depictions reflect literal beliefs or allegorical storytelling, but the effect is undeniable. Every element contributes to the workshop's rhythm. A faint sound catches your attention, the distant strumming of Apollo's lyre from another terrace. It weaves into the hum of chisels and loom threads, creating an unintended symphony. You realize that life on Olympus is less about isolation and more about layered interaction, where every sound, scent, and movement participates in a complex, ongoing composition. Fringe sources even suggest Athena occasionally synchronizes her workshops with distant music, testing coordination, attention, and response, an early experiment in multi-sensory strategy. As you wander deeper, you glimpse small instructional diagrams pinned to walls, illustrating both battle formations and civic engineering. Athena's role as a teacher is embedded in everything, physical, intellectual, and moral instruction coexisting seamlessly. You realize that every mortal hero she guides, every subtle influence she exerts, begins here in quiet, deliberate activity. The mundane actions of chiseling, weaving, and sketching are portals to larger interventions. You pause near a shelf filled with small scrolls and tablets. Each is meticulously labeled, cataloging centuries of observations, strategies, and potential future outcomes. Athena's memory is literal, preserved in the objects she touches. Fringe myths suggest that some of these scrolls can even influence human behavior when observed at the right moment, a gentle nudge through space and time. You shiver at the subtle power of such artifacts, knowledge as intervention, wisdom as control. By mid-morning, the workshop is alive yet serene, a microcosm of Olympus itself. The minor deities, tools, and artifacts all move in concert with Athena's quiet guidance. You feel the underlying order that supports not only her work but the functioning of the entire mountain. The balance of skill, intelligence, and authority, all woven into the everyday rhythm of life. Finally, you pause at a window overlooking a grove where olive trees sway in the gentle morning breeze. The sunlight catches on leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that seem almost deliberate. You sense that Athena has aligned even this moment, a reflection of her care and precision extending beyond walls, through terraces, and into the mountain itself. The everyday life of Athena is a testament to attention, intelligence, and the quiet shaping of eternity. You hear the faint hum of strings before you actually see him, and when Apollo finally comes into view, it's as though the light itself bends around his presence. The morning has warmed, and his golden hair catches the sun in a way that seems almost physically impossible. He carries a lyre, delicately carved and glowing faintly, which he plucks with a casual precision that would make any mortal musician weep with envy. Apollo's routine is a blend of music, prophecy, and medicine, each element weaving seamlessly into the other, creating a tapestry of daily life that feels both effortless and meticulously structured. The mainstream historical fact here is that Apollo is the Greek god of music, prophecy, and healing. In myth, he is associated with the lyre, the arts, and the famous Oracle of Delphi. Observing him now, you see these roles manifest in the minutiae of everyday activity, the way he tunes instruments, the gestures he uses while practicing melodies, even the brief consultations with minor healers in the palace. Each movement is simultaneously practice, ritual, and preparation for his interventions in mortal and immortal affairs. A quirky tidbit. Some myths suggest Apollo occasionally challenged minor gods to musical duels for the sheer amusement of it, or to settle disputes without bloodshed. You watch a small, winged messenger goddess attempt to match his notes and fail spectacularly. He smiles indulgently, not with arrogance, but with the serene patience of someone who knows that eternity allows endless practice. It's oddly comforting, this blend of skill, play, and gentle mentorship. Historians still argue whether Apollo's role as a god of healing and prophecy reflects actual early medical practices or symbolic narratives of wisdom and foresight. Standing here, you feel both interpretations at once. Healing is not an abstract concept in Olympus. It is method, observation, and attention, blended with divine influence. Prophecy, too, is woven into the daily routine, a practice rather than a dramatic event. You drift closer, noting how Apollo moves through his space with a grace that seems almost choreographed. Each string plucked produces more than sound. It creates ripples in the ambient energy of the palace. Even the walls seem to respond, absorbing vibrations, enhancing resonance, and broadcasting subtle cues to those who are attuned. Minor deities scurry around, adjusting instruments, preparing materials, and maintaining perfect conditions for sound. The fringe notion that some melodies can subtly influence mood or even behavior seems suddenly plausible as you stand there, feeling the resonance in your chest. Apollo pauses to inspect a collection of tablets, noting positions, timing, and tonal patterns. Some of these seem to map musical instruction. Others represent early codified medicine. and yet others hint at predictive formulas, patterns that, when interpreted correctly, could offer insight into both human and divine affairs. You realize that his day is a blend of performance, scholarship, and application. Fringe accounts even suggest he sometimes tests mortals indirectly, sending subtle signals through song or subtle manipulations of timing to prepare them for future events. You notice the air itself is warmer near him, subtly fragranced with myrrh and fresh ozone. Music here is not mere entertainment. It is infrastructure, a binding force that structures movement, focus, and social interaction. A minor god offers him a note about a pending festival. Apollo listens, then gently adjusts a melody to align with the expected sequence. Even the smallest detail in his daily routine has ripple effects across Olympus, guiding harmony, influence, and attention. He glances at a small basin of water where herbs float, and begins preparing a mixture with gestures that are both precise and graceful. This is the healing aspect of his routine: plants, elixirs, and minor interventions blended seamlessly with music and meditation. The mainstream fact is that Apollo's association with medicine included using herbs, balancing humors, and guiding both divine and mortal health. Observing him, you see that healing is not merely reactionary. It is preventative, thoughtful, and embedded in everyday practice. A small argument breaks out nearby between two river spirits over the placement of a potted laurel. Apollo steps over without speaking, his presence alone enough to dissolve the tension. Fringe tales suggest he sometimes manipulates minor quarrels musically, resolving disputes with melodies rather than words, a reminder that his power manifests in subtle, creative ways rather than brute force. You watch, impressed by the seamless integration of authority, art, and diplomacy. Apollo begins a soft improvisation, each note harmonizing with the morning breeze and distant murmurs of Olympus. You feel the subtle emotional influence. Even your own breathing slows, syncing unconsciously with the rhythm. Music is literal infrastructure here, guiding thought, mood, and focus. Historians still argue whether the musical emphasis in myth was metaphorical or a reflection of cultural priorities, but you sense that in Olympus, it is both. You observe minor healers moving around, adjusting vials and instruments as he gestures. His instruction is never overt, it is gestural, embedded in attention, tone, and timing. You understand why he is considered both teacher and guardian. Every interaction is a lesson in observation, care, and subtle influence. A fringe myth even suggests he sometimes tunes ambient energy in Olympus with precise musical patterns, aligning minor deities, attention with cosmic rhythms. You drift toward a sunlit terrace where Apollo checks herb gardens. Plants lean toward him as if responding to the vibrations of his music, a blend of art and biology or divinely orchestrated illusion. Each movement is deliberate, pruning, adjusting, and observing patterns. Even minor fluctuations in growth or alignment are noted, cataloged, and remembered. You begin to appreciate the full scope of his daily attention, a symphony of influence touching music, medicine, prophecy, and environment simultaneously. The morning stretches, and you follow him as he wanders through a grove, carrying instruments, tablets, and medicinal implements. Sunlight glances off the polished surfaces of tools, highlighting centuries of use and care. Apollo's movements are simultaneously deliberate and fluid, an ongoing choreography of intellect, skill, and artistry. Fringe sources note that he sometimes tests mortals by subtle manipulations of sound, scent, and rhythm, preparing them for challenges they may not even recognize. You pause near a reflective pool, watching him adjust a tuning fork that hovers mid-air, emitting a perfect, resonant tone. The sound radiates across the terrace, mingling with the wind and minor voices, creating a complex harmony that resonates subtly through the mountain. This is not simply art, it is infrastructure, influence, and mediation all at once. The everyday life of Apollo blends observation, instruction, and performance in ways both practical and poetic. By late morning, the terrace is alive with activity. Minor deities adjusting tools, preparing herbs, and recording observations. The air vibrates with sound, scent, and the faint thrill of order maintained without force. Even minor squabbles dissolve, mediated indirectly by music and presence. You realize the genius of Apollo's daily routine. It is not about spectacle. It is about structuring reality with subtlety, artistry, and continuous attention. Finally, you pause at a shaded corner, absorbing the interplay of light, sound, and presence. Apollo's everyday life is a testament to the integration of purpose, creativity, and influence. Observing him, you sense how the rhythms of a single immortal can ripple outward, guiding patterns, mood, and behavior across both mortal and divine realms. Ares storms into view next, and the atmosphere shifts almost immediately. Where Apollo's space hums with melody and meditation, Ares's presence brings tension, raw energy, and the faint scent of metal and heat. He strides purposefully, shoulders squared, boots clanging softly against the marble floors, and even minor deities instinctively adjust their paths to avoid interference. The mainstream historical fact is that Ares in Greek mythology is the god of war, embodying aggression, strategy, and the chaotic energy of battle. Watching him move, you understand that his everyday life is a choreography of controlled chaos, a constant balance between readiness and the prevention of actual conflict on Olympus. You notice that Ares's daily routine is surprisingly structured. Despite the energy he radiates, there is a pattern: morning drills with minor soldiers, consultation with strategists and advisors, and ritual exercises designed to keep both mind and body primed for conflict. Even his outbursts are ritualized, small displays of temper carefully calibrated to maintain authority without destabilizing the mountain. French sources suggest he occasionally challenges minor gods to duels for sport, creating controlled bursts of tension that serve as both entertainment and training. You watch as a pair of minor deities spar under his supervision, their movements precise, yet aggressive, a mini-battle unfolding under the ever-present gaze of the god of war. Historians still argue whether Ares's portrayals in myth were meant to glorify martial prowess or critique senseless violence. You feel both interpretations as you move closer. His presence is exhilarating, even intimidating, and yet there's a rhythm to his behavior. Moments of intense activity followed by periods of reflection, almost meditation in its own way. This duality makes him fascinating to observe. The god of war is as much strategist and teacher as he is a figure of brute force. You follow him into a training courtyard where bronze dummies and weapons glint in the sunlight. He demonstrates techniques with swift precision, correcting stances and footwork. The minor deities attempt to emulate him, their failures met with sharp but instructive criticism. Ares is impatient, yes, but his guidance is effective. Each motion is calculated to teach not only skill but confidence, resilience, and focus. Fringe tales even suggest that the energy of Ares's practice infuses the air, subtly enhancing the combat readiness of anyone nearby, mortal or divine. You can feel a faint pulse in your chest as the vibrations ripple through the terrace. As the morning progresses, Ares inspects the armory, a small hall filled with gleaming weapons, shields, and armor. Everything is arranged meticulously, though the organization appears chaotic at first glance. You notice patterns in the placement of swords, spears, and helmets, suggesting a hidden logic designed for rapid response. The mainstream historical fact here: Greek myth often emphasizes Ares's association with tools of war, not just brute aggression, highlighting the necessity of preparation and strategy in battle. His meticulous attention to the armory illustrates that skill and foresight are central to even the most chaotic of gods. You watch a minor deity fumble with a spear, and Ares steps forward with a swift correction, not harsh but exact. Every movement is a lesson in precision, timing, and awareness. There is a sense of discipline hidden beneath the god's fiery temperament, a structure that mirrors the rhythms of mortal armies he occasionally advises in myth. Fringe accounts suggest Ares sometimes orchestrates mock conflicts among minor gods to test loyalty, skill, and creativity, a kind of controlled chaos as both entertainment and training. You can imagine the centuries of strategic games he has supervised, each subtly shaping the character and skill of Olympus's inhabitants. You wander to a shaded terrace where Ares rests briefly, observing distant landscapes through a telescope-like artifact. His gaze sweeps across valleys and hills as though plotting battles that may never occur. There is a calculated calm here, a quiet moment that contrasts sharply with the energy of his training. The mainstream myths consistently depict Ares as strategic, not purely reckless, and this calm interlude reflects that duality. Even in peace, he plans, analyzes, and considers, the mind of war always alert. Ares's entourage of minor warriors and attendants move around him with careful precision, anticipating needs before they are voiced. He consults them occasionally, issuing concise, deliberate instructions that ripple through the courtyard like subtle commands. Fringe tales claim that some of these attendants are enchanted, carrying energy from his presence to amplify readiness, ensuring that minor mistakes are minimized. Observing this, you realize the everyday life of Ares is a constant interplay of energy, observation, and controlled exertion, a delicate balance that maintains both preparedness and harmony. He rises, pacing toward a small arena where combat simulations are underway. You notice that even these mock exercises are carefully choreographed to test problem-solving, endurance, and creativity. A minor god hesitates during a drill, and Ares steps in, offering a swift demonstration. His movements are lightning-quick yet measured, a teaching moment disguised as an exhibition of raw power. Fringe sources suggest that these exercises occasionally influence mortal battlefields indirectly, as his attention flows outward, subtly shaping outcomes through divine influence. Ares pauses near a fountain where minor deities hydrate, and you notice a subtle ritual. He touches the water, sending faint ripples that seem to reset the flow of energy in the courtyard. The mainstream Greek myths frequently depict gods interacting with natural elements to maintain balance or signal authority. You sense the practical effect of this gesture. It organizes space, attention, and behavior without overt command, a lesson in leadership that relies on presence rather than force. By late morning, Ares's routines, training, inspection, observation, have set a rhythm for the warriors and attendants under his supervision. Chaos is tamed through repetition, focus, and subtle signals. You begin to appreciate the complexity of his everyday life. It is not merely about conflict, but preparation, instruction, and the careful orchestration of energy and attention. Fringe anecdotes even suggest that he occasionally engages in philosophical discussions on the nature of courage and strategy, blending violence and intellect into an enduring practice. You drift toward a terrace overlooking distant valleys, where sunlight glints on polished spears and shields. Ares stands, arms crossed, surveying the landscape with a calm intensity that belies the intensity of his earlier drills. There is poetry in his presence, a combination of controlled chaos, discipline, and anticipation. Even minor quarrels in the courtyard dissolve under the weight of his gaze, a reminder that authority can be silent, yet unmistakable. Finally, you pause at the edge of the training grounds, absorbing the rhythm of Ares's world. His everyday life is a balance of instruction, strategy, physical exertion, and observation. Observing him, you sense how preparation, energy, and guidance ripple through Olympus, shaping patterns of behavior, influence, and even subtle environmental changes. The god of war is not constant battle. He is perpetual readiness, teaching, and calculated presence. The heartbeat of controlled chaos in a mountain of eternity. You step quietly toward Aphrodite's gardens, and the atmosphere shifts again, this time into something softer, sweeter, almost intoxicating. The air is heavy, with the scent of roses, jasmine, and something indefinably divine. Petals float lazily in a breeze that seems to exist only in her presence, and minor deities scurry about tending the flowers, adjusting fountains, and arranging ceremonial cushions in careful symmetry. The mainstream historical fact: Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, whose influence often extends subtly, weaving emotional and social currents both among gods and mortals. Observing her now, you see how her everyday life is a constant exercise in aesthetics, interaction, and the maintenance of harmony, an endless negotiation of allure and attention. A quirky detail emerges as you watch her tend a rosebush that glimmers with a faint golden sheen. Fringe myths suggest that some of her flowers are enchanted to bloom according to the emotional states of Olympus's residents, opening wider in joy or closing slightly in tension. You watch a bloom respond as a minor deity approaches, softening its posture in recognition of their presence. You can't help but marvel at the subtle psychological choreography inherent in even the smallest gestures. Historians still argue whether Aphrodite's portrayals reflect societal ideals of beauty and love or are purely allegorical, emphasizing the power of attraction and influence. Standing here, you feel both interpretations simultaneously. Her domain is not merely ornamental, it is interactive, social, and performative, shaping behavior, mood, and perception at every turn. Aphrodite moves gracefully between fountains, adjusting the flow of water and the placement of lilies. Each gesture is precise yet natural, a balance of artistry and authority. You notice that minor deities pause when she passes, not out of fear, but out of subtle acknowledgement, an unspoken communication that her presence defines the rhythm of this space. Fringe accounts suggest that she sometimes tests mortals indirectly by orchestrating displays of beauty that challenge desire, judgment, and emotional balance. Watching, you begin to appreciate the complex interplay of attention, perception, and influence she maintains daily. Nearby, a small grove of trees bears fruits that glow faintly, each carefully pruned to ensure aesthetic harmony. Aphrodite inspects each branch, lightly brushing leaves aside, occasionally adjusting the angle of a single bloom. Even in what seems trivial to a mortal observer, there is deep attention to detail. The mainstream fact: myths depict her as intervening in both mortal and divine relationships, shaping desire and ensuring balance. You notice this balance reflected in the layout of her gardens, the arrangement of light, and the choreography of minor spirits around her. A minor deity fumbles while arranging petals along a marble pathway. Aphrodite tilts her head slightly, and the mistake is corrected without a word, merely through the subtle shift of her gaze. Fringe tales suggest that she often communicates guidance this way, training immortals to read nuance, tone, and the silent language of presence. You realize this skill echoes across Olympus. Perception and subtle influence often outweigh overt instruction. Her morning continues with small interactions, greeting visiting nymphs, advising on arrangements, and observing behavioral patterns among attendants. There is a quiet diplomacy here. Aphrodite's power is not enforced by threat or force, but by attention, persuasion, and the ability to shape desires. Fringe accounts describe her as capable of influencing minor conflicts simply by adjusting emotional resonance, a form of social engineering that works seamlessly in a world where immortals' egos are as delicate as petals. You watch her float across a terrace where sunlight glints on fountains, casting rainbows across marble floors. Each reflection, ripple, and shadow seems intentional, reinforcing aesthetic cohesion and emotional resonance. The mainstream historical fact is that Aphrodite was often invoked in myth as a force for social cohesion through love and attraction, mediating conflict and fostering alliances. Standing here, you see how her everyday routine embodies these principles: light, color, fragrance, and motion orchestrated to guide attention, mood, and interaction. Aphrodite pauses to observe a small pair of minor deities practicing a ritual dance. She adjusts their posture, subtly altering rhythm, hand placement, and spacing. Fringe sources suggest that she sometimes tests mortals' perceptions by arranging choreographies or spectacles that challenge instinct, judgment, or propriety. You notice that even in minor adjustments, there is an underlying lesson in harmony, beauty, and consequence, a teaching embedded in everyday action. You wander closer to a shaded pavilion where Aphrodite prepares small decorative bowls filled with ambrosia and nectar. Every placement, every pattern of petals and leaves is calculated to delight, attract attention, and subtly influence social interactions. The mainstream fact, myth consistently associates her with ritual preparation and the cultivation of beauty, both in objects and behavior. Observing this, you feel the invisible threads connecting aesthetic influence to the broader governance of Olympus: control through attraction, order through pleasure. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. Some myths suggest Aphrodite occasionally enchants objects to emit gentle emotional cues, guiding responses subtly, almost imperceptibly. A simple bowl of nectar might invoke feelings of cooperation, admiration, or calm. You notice the attendants. Expressions soften as she moves among them, their behaviors aligning seamlessly with the intended flow of the day. As mid-morning approaches, you notice how her influence radiates beyond the gardens. Light shifts, flowers react, fountains catch reflections in ways that seem choreographed, and minor disputes vanish or adjust in timing with her movements. Historians still argue whether such portrayals reflect societal instruction or narrative embellishment, but you sense an operational logic. Aphrodite's daily actions preserve harmony, enforce subtle social norms, and maintain emotional equilibrium across Olympus. A minor quirk emerges as she tends a rare flower with petals that change color according to temperature. Fringe sources suggest she sometimes trains flowers as practice for her emotional influence, calibrating blooms to respond to mood, intention, and perception. You smile at the absurdity and brilliance. A goddess literally practicing emotional engineering on flora. By late morning, the courtyard hums with quiet activity. Minor deities move in anticipation of her gestures. Fountains ripple in alignment, petals tilt, and shadows shift as if choreographed. Her daily life is less about grand declarations and more about subtle orchestration, a continuous balancing act between aesthetics, social influence, and environmental manipulation. Observing this, you understand why the myths consistently emphasize her power over love and attraction. It is pervasive, silent, and profoundly effective. Finally, you pause beneath an arbor, where sunlight filters through roses, glinting off dew like liquid gold. Aphrodite glances your way, smiling softly, and you feel a faint sense of alignment, as though the air itself has registered your presence. Her everyday life is a meditation in beauty, influence, and attention, a seamless interplay of environment, emotion, and interaction that subtly shapes Olympus itself. Hephaestus is already at work before you fully register him. The rhythmic hammering of metal echoes across Olympus, creating a steady, almost hypnotic cadence that blends with the distant murmur of fountains and the soft rustle of leaves. Sparks leap from anvils like tiny, controlled fireworks, illuminating the shadows of his workshop in brief, bright flashes. The mainstream historical fact is that Hephaestus is the god of fire, craftsmanship, and metalworking, famed for forging divine weapons, armor, and artifacts. Observing him now, you realize that his everyday life is a meticulous blend of creation, maintenance, and problem-solving, with each hammer strike contributing to the mountain's functioning as much as its artistry. A quirky detail presents itself as you notice a small automaton, a humanoid figure of bronze, moving carefully along the edge of the workshop. Fringe myths suggest Hephaestus created sentient mechanical servants to assist with mundane chores or to test minor deities in miniature trials of skill. The automaton pauses mid-step, tilts its head toward him, and adjusts its motion with exact precision, a tiny reflection of his own relentless attention to detail. You can't help but smile at the idea of a god of mechanics training robots for eternity. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's legendary skill reflects early Greek observations of metallurgy or allegorical storytelling about human ingenuity. Standing here, you feel the tangible truth of both. Technical mastery and divine creativity, combined in a daily routine that spans both utility and artistry. You drift closer to an anvil where he hammers a faintly glowing sword, each strike ringing with precise rhythm. Sparks dance, forming intricate patterns before fading. He moves with economy and purpose. Nothing is wasted. Minor assistants carry tools, ingredients, and partially completed works in quiet procession, maintaining strict order while adapting to the unpredictable needs of molten metal and magical flux. Fringe accounts even suggest Hephaestus sometimes embeds subtle enchantments into objects mid-forge, testing the resilience and attention of apprentices and minor deities alike. He steps back, wiping sweat from his brow. Though the gods do not sweat as mortals do, this motion is ritualized, a human-like acknowledgement of effort that adds texture to his immortality. You notice a faint warmth in the room, not oppressive but enveloping, as if his fire imbues the very air with energy. The mainstream fact is that ancient texts describe Hephaestus as both limping and enduring, embodying resilience and unmatched skill, qualities that manifest vividly in the continuous exertion of his craft. A minor god fumbles with a piece of metal, and Hephaestus intervenes, not with anger, but with slow, deliberate instruction. His guidance is exacting, small motions, precise pressure, timing, and technique. Fringe myths suggest that such instruction serves as training in both physical skill and patience, cultivating qualities necessary for immortals engaged in subtle orchestration of Olympus's daily functions. You note how even minor errors become lessons rather than punishments, part of a continuous educational flow. You wander toward a corner where Hephaestus works on more delicate creations, jewelry, intricate tools, and enchanted talismans. Each is placed carefully on soft cushions or hung from supports to cool or set. Even the simplest of these objects carry dual purposes: utility and aesthetic beauty, reinforcing the principle that craftsmanship on Olympus is inseparable from attention and intention. Fringe tales claim some talismans are designed to subtly influence minor disputes or guide behavior, a quiet but effective application of technical skill. The smell of metal, oil, and faint incense blends in the workshop, creating a sensory experience unique to this space. Sparks continue to fly as Hephaestus turns his attention to a large bronze shield, tapping, polishing, and testing resonance. The mainstream fact: in myth, Hephaestus crafted the shield of Achilles, among countless other divine implements. Watching him, you understand the care, expertise, and patience that must underpin even a single creation, a process that can take hours, days, or centuries in Olympus time. Nearby, minor assistants adjust tongs, temper metals, and monitor furnaces. Every movement is synchronized with his rhythm, each strike and adjustment rippling outward to maintain balance in the workshop. Fringe accounts suggest Hephaestus sometimes tests minor deities by altering materials mid-process, forcing them to adapt in real-time. Lessons in improvisation, patience, and observation. You sense the subtle drama, inherent in even mundane tasks, the quiet tension that teaches resilience and focus. You notice small sparks coalescing into patterns along the floor and walls, forming intricate geometric shapes that fade before fully manifesting. Some fringe stories claim these are unconscious magical experiments, revealing hidden properties of metal, fire, or the workshop itself. You feel the plausibility. Even the physical space seems alive under his continuous manipulation, responding to motion, heat, and attention in ways that defy ordinary logic. By mid-morning, Hephaestus has moved between tasks with smooth efficiency: forging, supervising, instructing, and testing. The minor deities respond to his rhythm, adapting to shifts in heat, light, and magical resonance. You realize that his everyday life is a constant balance of creativity, precision, and oversight, a perpetual interplay of physical skill and subtle influence that sustains both the mountain and the artifacts that govern Olympus. A small automaton carrying a partially forged dagger pauses and tilts in acknowledgement. Hephaestus nods imperceptibly, and it adjusts its path perfectly. Fringe myths suggest that some of his creations are capable of semi-autonomous thought, subtly interacting with minor gods and objects, a reflection of his skill and inventiveness. You marvel at the thought that a workshop on Olympus functions as both a studio and a living, responsive system. Finally, Hephaestus steps back from a finished piece, a helmet etched with intricate designs and faint runes. The sunlight catches the metal, glinting off delicate engravings. You feel the weight of craftsmanship, the careful application of knowledge, and the quiet rhythm that underpins creation here. His everyday life is a testament to endurance, skill, and subtle guidance, a delicate blend of labor, magic, and mentorship that shapes not only objects but behaviors, patterns, and the pulse of Olympus itself. You wander into the quieter, shaded grove where Dionysus is already at work, or at least, what passes for work in his world. The air is thick with the scent of ripening grapes, spiced wine, and a faint sweetness that seems to cling to every surface. Leaves shimmer in faint golden light, reflecting off wine-colored streams that crisscross the terraces. The mainstream historical fact: Dionysus is the god of wine, festivity, and ecstatic ritual. Here, you see his everyday life as a careful orchestration of pleasure, creativity, and subtle influence, blending the mundane cultivation of vineyards with the magical maintenance of atmosphere and mood across Olympus. A quirky detail immediately grabs your attention. Some of the grapevines are said to respond to music, twisting and bending to the rhythms of song. Fringe myths suggest he occasionally experiments with minor deities or mortals, challenging them to create songs or dances that coax the vines into new formations. You watch a nymph attempt to harmonize with his chants, and the vine itself twists slightly in response, a playful acknowledgement of her effort. You can't help but grin at the idea of plants literally performing on cue for a god of revelry. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's mythic role reflects early agricultural practices, cultural rituals of intoxication, or symbolic explorations of chaos and order. Standing here, you feel the overlapping truths: tending vines, overseeing celebration, and subtly shaping perception all converge in the rhythm of his day. Dionysus moves among the vines, hands brushing against leaves and fruit, occasionally touching clusters to test their magical resonance. Minor spirits follow him, carrying baskets, adjusting trellises, and subtly infusing air with aromatics that enhance the intoxicating environment. Fringe sources suggest that some spirits are semi-conscious extensions of Dionysus's will, ensuring that the vineyard not only produces fruit, but responds emotionally to the ambiance of Olympus. A small argument flares up nearby among minor revelers over the correct order of grape-tasting rituals. Dionysus steps in, not with admonition but with a subtle song. The tension dissolves instantly, a musical nudge guiding behavior and mood. The mainstream fact: myths emphasize his ability to influence emotions and social dynamics, mediating both joy and chaos with subtle intervention. You feel the gentle power in action, invisible yet pervasive. He pauses at a small fountain of wine-colored liquid, dipping his hand and letting droplets fall rhythmically onto leaves. Fringe tales suggest these rituals sometimes influence mortal creativity or perception, a playful experiment in alignment and attention. You watch the minor deities adjust their motions in response, understanding without instruction, a testament to the subtle communication he maintains daily. You notice how laughter and song ripple through the grove, blending with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. Dionysus orchestrates these elements almost imperceptibly, balancing energy, anticipation, and mood. His influence is pervasive yet gentle, a careful threading of chaos into harmony. Fringe myths suggest he sometimes stages controlled bouts of revelry or minor mischief to test immortals' creativity and emotional resilience, a daily exercise in both pleasure and subtle training. The grove itself seems to pulse with life. Vines twist, leaves shimmer, and flowers open in response to his movements and melodies. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myth repeatedly connects Dionysus with fertility, growth, and the cycles of nature. Observing this, you realize the everyday activity of a god is not just personal indulgence. It is an environmental calibration, maintaining balance, beauty, and subtle influence across Olympus. Minor deities scurry to prepare for a mid-morning festivity, arranging tables, polishing goblets, and adjusting drapes that shimmer in sunlight. Dionysus inspects everything with a casual eye, offering a nod or a tilt of the head to redirect attention. Fringe accounts suggest these micro-adjustments influence social flow, ensuring interactions unfold with just the right mix of spontaneity and order. You feel a faint pull in your own attention, a subtle alignment with his rhythms. He sits briefly on a terrace, plucking a small lyre. Each note carries through the grove, prompting minor adjustments from spirits, flowers, and even the light itself. You sense the coordination, an almost imperceptible pattern of cause and effect, orchestrated for both aesthetics and subtle influence. Historians still debate whether Dionysian rituals were purely symbolic, psychological experiments, or practical observations of group behavior. But standing here, you feel all three converging. A minor detail draws your eye. Small bottles of wine infused with herbs and minor enchantments sit neatly on a low table. Fringe sources suggest these concoctions can subtly influence temperament, perception, or creativity. An everyday exercise in crafting not just taste, but emotional experience. You imagine the endless variations he might create, each bottle a miniature experiment in mood, alignment, and attention. The sun tilts toward mid-morning, casting warm streaks through the leafy canopy. Dionysus walks among the vines, occasionally touching fruit or leaves, singing faint, whimsical notes. Each gesture aligns minor deities, plants, and energy in subtle, intentional harmony. The mainstream fact: myths frequently depict him as a guide for both mortal and divine revelers, orchestrating ecstasy and social cohesion. Observing him, you see how carefully structured the chaos of his domain is, how delight and order coexist in every movement, melody, and interaction. By late morning, the grove buzzes with soft activity. Vines, fountains, minor deities, and musical notes interweave seamlessly under Dionysus's watch. Even small misalignments, a tilted cup, a misplaced leaf, are adjusted almost imperceptibly. Fringe tales suggest that he sometimes measures minor responses to wine or song, creating a continuous calibration of behavior, mood, and creativity. Finally, you pause beneath a trellis heavy with grape clusters. Dionysus's presence is simultaneously grounding and disorienting, a reminder that influence does not need force. It can be woven into pleasure, scent, rhythm, and observation. His everyday life is a meditation in harmony, indulgence, and subtle power, a constant shaping of environment and emotion that extends through Olympus and beyond. You notice Hestia's presence only when you step into the central hearth hall, a quiet sanctuary filled with the gentle warmth of flames and the faint aroma of herbs burning in subtle spirals. Unlike the more flamboyant gods, her influence is nearly invisible but profoundly stabilizing. The mainstream historical fact: Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, home, and domesticity, embodying stability, ritual, and the continuity of communal life. Observing her, you realize that her everyday life is a constant management of energy, attention, and sacred space, maintaining equilibrium in a domain that might otherwise unravel in the endless flux of Olympus. A quirky detail. Fringe myths suggest that Hestia occasionally communicates with minor deities or mortals through the flicker patterns of her hearth fire, subtly indicating mood, warnings, or approval. You catch a brief glint in the flames as a minor deity approaches, and it almost seems to acknowledge her unspoken instructions. The subtlety is staggering. You feel as though the entire room itself is alive with her presence. Historians still argue whether Hestia's prominence in Greek ritual reflects social values of domestic order or symbolic representations of internal stability. Standing here, you feel both. Her attention is practical, maintaining routine and sacred observance, and symbolic, a reminder of continuity in the ever-shifting landscape of gods and mortals. You drift closer to the hearth, observing the way she tends the fire. Each log is placed with careful precision, every ember observed for color, heat, and placement. Minor deities move quietly, replenishing kindling, adjusting herbs, and maintaining bowls of ceremonial oil. Fringe accounts suggest that Hestia's interactions with flame are not purely practical. They subtly influence emotion, attention, and even minor patterns of behavior in all who dwell nearby. A small ritual unfolds. She stirs a bowl of herbs above the flame, allowing smoke to curl in deliberate spirals. The mainstream fact: Greek myths consistently depict her as a stabilizing presence, ensuring domestic and communal spaces remain harmonious. You notice that even minor disturbances, dropped tools, whispered arguments, dissipate under the ambient aura of her fire, almost as if the flames themselves carry instruction. Hestia pauses to observe a minor deity tending a bowl of incense, subtly tilting her head to indicate a more effective placement. Fringe sources suggest that these minor adjustments are exercises in mindfulness, teaching observation, patience, and respect for the subtle flow of energy. You sense the quiet intensity of her guidance, small, invisible, yet profoundly shaping the environment and behavior of all present. You wander through the hall, noticing how the light from the hearth shifts across walls, floor, and ceiling. Shadows stretch and curl with an almost deliberate rhythm, and minor deities adjust their positions accordingly, aligning their work with the subtle energy of the flame. Historians still argue whether such descriptions of Hestia's hearth were allegorical or literal reflections of ritual practices, but the effect is undeniable. Attention, order, and energy are concentrated and maintained here continuously. A fringe detail catches your eye. Some myths suggest she occasionally uses the heat of the fire to record intentions or offerings, embedding energy into objects left upon the hearth. You notice a small offering left by a minor deity, its position subtly shifted as if nudged by invisible hands. You realize her influence is active yet unseen, a continuous flow that structures space and behavior without spectacle. By mid-morning, the hall is a quiet nexus of movement, observation, and subtle adjustment. Minor deities attend to vessels, incense, and hearths, their actions synchronized with the invisible rhythms of Hestia's attention. Even a misplaced tool is quietly corrected, not by command but by the gentle, persistent pull of her presence. Fringe myths claim that mortals who unknowingly aligned with Hestia's hearth experienced improved decision-making and emotional stability, a testament to the pervasive, subtle influence of domestic divinity. Hestia moves to a corner where small offerings rest. She touches each delicately, imbuing them with faint energy or attention. The mainstream fact: she was central to Greek domestic ritual, invoked in both private and public spaces to preserve harmony. Observing her now, you sense that these seemingly simple acts, touching, observing, adjusting, carry layers of significance, preserving balance and continuity across Olympus. You pause near a window that catches morning sunlight on the hearth. Shadows stretch across the floor in quiet geometric patterns, and minor deities adjust their positions without guidance, sensing the flow and rhythm of the sacred space. Fringe tales suggest that these patterns were observed as subtle tests or lessons in perception, endurance, and attentiveness. You can feel how this quiet instruction forms the backbone of daily life here, often unnoticed but essential. The air smells faintly of herbs, polished stone, and warm smoke. Every movement, Hestia tending flames, minor deities adjusting vessels, the subtle flicker of firelight creates a gentle, ongoing meditation in routine, stability, and focus. Her everyday life is largely invisible, but profoundly structuring, providing a calm constant in the shifting tides of more dramatic gods and events. You notice that even conversations in the hall adjust to the rhythms of the hearth. Softer tones, measured gestures, and pauses aligning with subtle cues you almost don't perceive. Fringe sources claim that her influence extends beyond Olympus itself, maintaining equilibrium in mortal homes where her presence is honored. You sense the pervasive calm, an invisible but foundational force underpinning the mountain's daily life. By late morning, you find a quiet corner, observing Hestia as she finishes adjusting incense and embers. Minor deities move about with an almost imperceptible deference, their behavior harmonized with her invisible yet commanding presence. The mainstream fact, she embodies continuity, ritual, and domestic focus, essential for both mortals and immortals to navigate the rhythms of life. Finally, you step back and absorb the hall's serenity. Hestia's everyday life is not about spectacle or overt intervention. It is about subtle guidance, maintenance, and stability. The hearth itself seems alive, radiating calm influence that threads through Olympus, shaping behavior, perception, and energy. Observing her, you understand how quiet attention, routine, and presence can wield power as profound as any dramatic act of divine intervention. You drift toward the airy glades where Hermes is already darting about, moving with a speed and lightness that almost defies observation. The faint jingle of his winged sandals accompanies every step, and messages, parcels, and minor errands float magically around him, forming a whirlwind of motion that somehow remains organized. The mainstream historical fact: Hermes is the god of travel, commerce, communication, and cunning, acting as a messenger between gods and mortals. Watching him now, you see his everyday life is a seamless balance of errands, observation, and guidance, blending speed, wit, and subtle influence into a continuous dance of attention and action. A quirky detail. Fringe myths suggest Hermes occasionally plays tricks on mortals or minor deities using subtle illusions, like a letter that changes wording mid-read, or a message delivered upside down. You watch him hand a scroll to a minor deity, only for it to vanish and reappear neatly rolled in the recipient's grasp. There's an elegance and humor to these small pranks, highlighting both his cunning and the playful flexibility of divine intervention. Historians still argue whether Hermes' mythic role as a messenger reflects early Greek communication networks or allegorical representations of agility and cunning. Standing here, you feel both. A god literally and figuratively connecting the mountain's threads, orchestrating attention and action with precision, speed, and ingenuity. Hermes moves between courtyards, marketplaces, and small temples, interacting with minor deities and creatures alike. Each gesture, each message, is precise yet fluid. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes tests loyalty or attention by creating miniature challenges or misdirected instructions that require perception and cleverness to resolve. You follow a small parcel as it zips through the air, spiraling around pillars before landing perfectly in the hands of its intended recipient. He pauses briefly to adjust a set of winged sandals resting on a pedestal, tapping them lightly and speaking a few syllables that seem to make the leather shimmer. The mainstream fact: Hermes is associated with winged sandals or talaria, enabling rapid movement and divine agility. Observing this, you realize that even mundane preparation, adjusting equipment, rehearsing routes, is integral to his daily rhythm, a meticulous calibration of speed, presence, and responsiveness. Nearby, minor deities attempt to match his swiftness in small errands or delivery tasks. He observes with mild amusement, occasionally leaving a small hint or shortcut, sometimes a playful obstacle. Fringe myths claim these tests are part of ongoing training in wit, adaptability, and subtle problem-solving, a way to instill attentiveness, speed, and perception in those who serve him. You notice that even small mistakes elicit soft corrections, not punishment, reinforcing learning rather than imposing authority. The air vibrates faintly with the energy of motion. Parcels, messages, and fleeting illusions, all crisscrossing paths in a carefully maintained chaos. Hermes supervises without apparent effort, adjusting flow, timing, and alignment with imperceptible gestures. The mainstream historical fact: Hermes was often invoked as a mediator, guide, and facilitator, responsible for maintaining smooth interactions across realms. Observing him, you feel how speed, communication, and cleverness combine to maintain harmony in the often chaotic world of Olympus. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. Some minor deities whisper that Hermes occasionally manipulates the timing of messages to orchestrate serendipity or subtle lessons. A single delayed scroll could ripple across a minor event, testing perception or prompting creative solutions. You feel a faint thrill imagining the web of influence created through these invisible interventions. By mid-morning, Hermes has darted through courtyards, adjusted minor disputes, delivered messages, and orchestrated small, playful diversions. He pauses only briefly at a shaded fountain, touching the water and letting ripples carry subtle information across the area, an almost imperceptible transmission of attention and alignment. Fringe accounts suggest that some of these micro-adjustments may even subtly affect mortal perception, reinforcing his role as a messenger and influencer across realms. You notice minor errands being executed with synchronized precision. Parcels arrive on time, minor spirits align themselves with task flows, and even the positioning of shadows seems subtly adjusted to convey direction and attention. Historians still argue whether Hermes's myths are purely symbolic or reflect practical coordination techniques, but standing here you feel the operational genius of his daily routine. Every gesture, step, and spark of energy is a node in a vast network of influence. Hermes moves to a small terrace where scrolls, tokens, and objects requiring delivery are sorted. Each object seems alive with potential, moving as if responding to invisible guidance. Fringe tales claim some scrolls carry coded magical instructions that minor deities must interpret correctly. A playful, yet effective training in perception, attention, and interpretation. You watch as an errant scroll hovers, then self-corrects into the proper container, a tiny demonstration of his playful precision. The sun tilts toward late morning, and Hermes is already in motion again. You follow him through corridors and courtyards, observing his seamless integration of speed, cunning, and guidance. Every step, glance, and adjustment carries both practical and subtle influence, reinforcing his dual role as messenger and orchestrator of minor lessons across Olympus. Finally, you pause on a balcony overlooking the glades and gardens below. Hermes swoops past, delivering a parcel to Apollo, nudging a minor deity toward a task, and adjusting the position of a floating object mid-air. His everyday life is a whirlwind of attention, motion, and influence, playful, precise, and indispensable. Observing him, you sense how communication, speed, and cunning serve not only functionality, but the maintenance of structure, learning, and subtle orchestration across the entire mountain. You move now to the airy halls where Athena conducts her day, and the shift in energy is immediate. The air seems crisper, charged with thought, strategy, and subtle authority. Scrolls, tablets, and models of cities are arrayed on tables, and minor deities hover attentively, awaiting her insight. The mainstream historical fact: Athena is the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and crafts, often depicted as both thoughtful and decisive, guiding mortals and gods alike. Observing her now, you see her everyday life as a careful orchestration of instruction, counsel, and problem-solving, blending intellectual rigor with subtle mentorship. A quirky detail. Fringe myths suggest Athena occasionally disguises herself as a minor deity or mortal to observe behaviors and test decision-making. You catch her reviewing a simulation of a miniature city, shifting pieces of clay to reflect defensive formations and resource management, and you realize she treats even play as a serious exercise in applied wisdom. Her attention is total, and even the smallest misalignment of a figurine draws a precise adjustment. Historians still argue whether Athena's martial and intellectual roles reflect Greek societal ideals or are allegorical representations of balanced virtue. Standing here, you sense the dual truth. She embodies logic and strategy, yet her guidance is woven into everyday activities, subtle and continuous rather than dramatic or imposing. Athena moves among the tables, consulting minor deities on problem sets, plans for festivals, or the arrangement of educational exercises. Each gesture is deliberate yet fluid, guiding thought without overt imposition. Fringe sources claim she occasionally sets up moral or strategic puzzles disguised as mundane tasks, ensuring that her charges learn through experience and observation. You watch a minor deity pause, consider the options carefully, and adjust the position of a miniature wall in response to her subtle cues. Nearby, a fountain trickles softly, its water reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Athena dips a hand into it, sending small ripples across the surface, and the patterns seem to encode information only perceptible to the attentive observer. The mainstream fact: myths consistently depict Athena as both teacher and strategist, guiding mortals and immortals in matters of skill, judgment, and foresight. You notice that even minor adjustments, a tilt of a cup, a shift in a tile, carry embedded lessons. You wander closer to a wall lined with painted diagrams, maps, and symbolic patterns. Athena reviews them meticulously, noting inconsistencies or areas that could be improved. Fringe accounts suggest she occasionally tests cognitive flexibility by subtly altering patterns, ensuring those around her remain observant and adaptable. You realize that her daily routine is as much about maintaining mental rigor as it is about teaching or planning. A minor deity fumbles with a tablet, unsure of how to balance the symbolic logic. Athena steps forward, not with reproach, but with a subtle nod and a guiding gesture. The minor deity adjusts, and a complex solution emerges. Fringe myths suggest she often communicates in this indirect manner, training observation, patience, and problem-solving without the need for direct instruction. The process is subtle yet deeply effective, reflecting her dual emphasis on strategy and wisdom. By mid-morning, Athena's activities have created a ripple effect across the hall. Minor deities move with focus, attention is concentrated, and simulations continue with increasing precision. You see how her influence extends beyond instruction. She is shaping perception, decision-making, and cognitive habits in real time. Historians still debate whether such portrayals were prescriptive or symbolic, but the logic and rhythm of her actions are undeniable. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. Some minor myths claim Athena embeds mnemonic patterns into visual arrangements and gestures, subtly improving memory and spatial reasoning in those she trains. You notice a minor deity pausing, then recalling a precise sequence of symbols, likely a response to these subtle cues. Even the simplest tasks are imbued with layered instruction. Athena moves now to a terrace overlooking a small training ground where minor warriors practice tactical formations. She observes their movements, occasionally gesturing slightly, and the pattern corrects itself almost magically, as if the ground itself guides the participants. The mainstream fact: Athena is frequently portrayed as the divine strategist in warfare, providing tactical insight without resorting to brute force. Observing this, you see her influence in real time, teaching through adjustment, observation, and subtle control. You notice the quiet rhythm of her interactions. Every gesture, glance, or minor instruction contributes to the learning and alignment of those around her. Fringe myths suggest she sometimes creates deliberately ambiguous situations to test intuition and judgment, reinforcing the cultivation of wisdom as a lived, daily practice rather than abstract knowledge. By late morning, the hall hums with organized activity. Simulations, discussions, and minor exercises flow seamlessly under Athena's supervision. She moves among them with measured grace, blending authority, mentorship, and observation. Even disputes are subtly mediated without overt intervention, as her guidance radiates outward in invisible patterns. Finally, you pause at the edge of a terrace, observing Athena consulting a miniature battlefield, while minor deities rearrange structures according to her subtle corrections. Her everyday life is a continuous orchestration of wisdom, strategy, and guidance, an unending cycle of observation, subtle teaching, and applied intellect. You realize that the god of strategy operates quietly but profoundly, shaping the cognitive rhythms, moral judgments, and problem-solving skills of Olympus itself. You wander toward the higher terraces, where the air shimmers faintly with a golden glow, signaling the presence of Helios, the sun god. Even from a distance, you feel the warmth radiating, not oppressive but steady, a quiet power that threads through Olympus like a heartbeat. The mainstream historical fact: Helios is the personification of the sun in Greek mythology, responsible for guiding his chariot across the sky daily, bringing light and order to the world below. Observing him, you understand that his everyday life is both repetitive and precise, a measured rhythm of duty, timing, and divine consistency. A quirky detail: fringe myths suggest that Helios sometimes allows minor celestial spirits to trace his chariot across Olympus in miniature, like apprentices practicing the management of light and time. You watch tiny glimmers tracing sunbeams over terraces, flickering in patterns only perceptible if you pay close attention. The choreography is subtle, but it conveys both skill and teaching, sunlight as pedagogy. Historians still argue whether Helios's mythic daily circuit represents early Greek understanding of astronomy, or allegorical representations of the passage of time and divine order. Standing here, you sense the duality: literal celestial duty intertwined with symbolic maintenance of rhythm and structure across Olympus and the mortal world. You drift closer, noting the preparation of his chariot, gleaming with gold and inscribed with subtle celestial patterns. Minor deities assist, adjusting reins, polishing wheels, and testing magical components that regulate speed, trajectory, and illumination. Fringe sources suggest that each adjustment subtly influences the clarity of light and the alignment of shadows in both mortal and divine domains, a quiet calibration with far-reaching impact. A minor deity fumbles with a set of reins, and Helios corrects them with a gentle motion, guiding the adjustment through slight pressure and subtle verbal cues. The mainstream fact: myths depict Helios as both constant and vigilant, ensuring his chariot traverses the sky with precision. You notice how even minor corrections ripple outward, ensuring timing, light distribution, and celestial balance remain unbroken. Nearby, a reflective pool mirrors the rising sun. Helios traces patterns across the water, observing how light bends, refracts, and illuminates small details. Fringe accounts suggest he sometimes experiments with these reflections to teach perception, focus, or coordination to minor deities under his watch. The water itself seems to respond, echoing the rhythms of attention and observation in fluid form. By mid-morning, the chariot is fully prepared, and Helios tests its motion along a short track. Sparks of radiant energy flare from the wheels as minor celestial spirits adjust positions and reins, synchronizing their efforts. Fringe myths claim that minor misalignments in these tests could subtly influence weather, light, or time perception below Olympus, a practical demonstration of cause and effect in a divine context. You notice the quiet choreography of attendants. Their movements are harmonized with the motion of light, the placement of reflective surfaces, and the gradual warming of terraces. Historians still debate whether these myths reflect astronomical observation or narrative symbolism, but standing here, you feel the operational reality. Every gesture, glance, and adjustment contributes to precise management of a vast and influential system. Helios steps onto the terrace, stretching his arms as if to embrace the expanse of Olympus. Fringe sources suggest he occasionally incorporates small lessons into these gestures, teaching minor deities about timing, alignment, and observation through subtle demonstration rather than instruction. You sense that even in a god's daily task, there is room for teaching, training, and influencing perception. You wander along a corridor where sunlight streams through crystalline windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor. Helios watches the light bend, adjusting curtains or crystals to maintain both beauty and precision. The mainstream fact: myths frequently depict Helios as attentive to the interplay of light, time, and observation, blending physical presence with perceptual influence. Even small adjustments carry consequences, teaching attentiveness and subtle calibration. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. Some minor myths claim Helios sometimes orchestrates brief celestial anomalies to challenge perception, forcing attentiveness and precision in minor deities. You notice a fleeting shadow shifting unexpectedly across a wall, causing a minor deity to correct its position immediately. A tiny, elegant test in real time. By late morning, the chariot is fully aligned, minor spirits are in position, and Helios takes the reins, testing readiness for the sun's journey across the sky. The hall, terrace, and surrounding glades seem to hum with coordinated energy, a complex but invisible system of motion, observation, and influence. Fringe myths suggest even mortals may subtly feel alignment or misalignment of these energies, though only perceptively rather than consciously. Finally, you pause near the edge of the terrace as Helios prepares to ascend. The morning light reflects on his chariot and golden reins, casting radiant streaks across Olympus. His everyday life is a combination of precision, observation, and subtle guidance, maintaining both cosmic rhythm and the perception of order across realms. Watching him, you feel the weight and elegance of duty executed with grace, a daily routine that shapes light, time, and experience itself. You follow a winding path toward the secluded glades, where Artemis is already in motion, silent and precise, moving with a grace that seems to bend the surrounding light. The air smells faintly of pine, damp earth, and the subtle tang of wild herbs, a scent almost intoxicating in its clarity. The mainstream historical fact: Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon, often depicted as a protector of young animals and mortals, as well as a skilled archer and tracker. Observing her now, you realize that her everyday life blends rigorous physical activity, observation, and guardianship, integrating natural rhythms with subtle instruction for both mortals and immortals. A quirky detail: fringe myths suggest that some of the animals in her care are minor spirits disguised as wildlife, performing tasks and tests for those who travel her domain. You notice a small deer pause and tilt its head as Artemis adjusts the angle of her bow, almost as if it were evaluating her technique or waiting for her guidance. You marvel at the fluidity of her attention. She interacts seamlessly with flora, fauna, and minor deities alike, enforcing order without visible effort. Historians still argue whether Artemis's mythic hunting represents practical early Greek hunting practices or symbolic ideals of protection, independence, and precision. Standing here, you feel both. Her vigilance is practical, yet her presence carries layered meaning, blending physical skill, ethical instruction, and careful observation. Artemis steps lightly across a rocky ledge, adjusting a trap meant to guide prey safely and efficiently. Minor deities follow at a distance, mimicking her movements with subtle adjustments. Fringe accounts suggest she occasionally designs complex courses through forests to teach tracking, patience, and observation, a subtle pedagogy embedded in play and duty. You watch as a small fox, barely larger than a shadow, follows the trail precisely, demonstrating her influence without a word spoken. Nearby, the faint shimmer of a stream reflects sunlight filtered through trees. Artemis dips her fingers into the water, sending ripples that subtly adjust the flow of small fish and minor water spirits. The mainstream fact: myths depict Artemis as deeply connected to natural order and ecology, ensuring balance in her forests and streams. You notice how her gestures, timing, and subtle manipulation maintain both harmony and dynamic interaction across her domain. A minor deity fumbles with a bow, and Artemis steps close, not to take over but to adjust stance, tension, and aim with imperceptible guidance. Fringe myths claim she uses these moments to cultivate focus, precision, and intuition, embedding lessons into routine movements rather than formal instruction. Observing this, you feel the elegance of learning through subtle correction rather than explicit command. By mid-morning, her forest hums with quiet activity. Animals move in rhythm with her instructions, minor deities adjust to her subtle cues, and plants sway in response to her presence. Fringe tales suggest that Artemis can imbue her domain with faint protective magic, ensuring safety while simultaneously testing attention and adaptability. You see how her everyday life combines guardianship with practical and magical teaching. A small group of deer approaches cautiously, each responding to invisible signals. Artemis adjusts her stance, silently guiding their path, ensuring both safety and exercise. The mainstream fact: myths frequently depict her as a protector of youth and animals, balancing nurturing with independence. You notice that this balance is maintained continuously, woven into each movement, glance, and adjustment. You wander to a rocky outcrop overlooking her hunting grounds, where minor deities practice archery and tracking under her watchful eye. Artemis observes, offering subtle adjustments, shifting footing, tilting heads, or guiding aim without speaking. Fringe accounts suggest she sometimes orchestrates slight environmental changes, falling leaves, shifting shadows, sudden gusts, to test awareness and reaction. You see the precision in every gesture and ripple of movement, a choreography designed to cultivate vigilance, skill, and intuition. Nearby, a small ritual fire burns faintly, releasing the scent of herbs. Artemis tends it briefly, whispering incantations that adjust local wildlife behavior, signaling readiness for practice, or subtly guiding patterns of movement. The mainstream fact: Greek myths portray her as capable of influencing both natural and supernatural domains, blending skill with strategic oversight. You notice how even mundane tasks, lighting a fire, arranging stones, whispering commands, carry significant influence when executed with intention. By late morning, her domain operates as a finely tuned system. Animals, minor deities, and environmental cues respond fluidly to her presence. Fringe myths suggest she occasionally creates subtle challenges in the terrain to test problem-solving, observation, and adaptability, a daily integration of duty, skill, and instruction. You see how her seemingly solitary routine is both interactive and educational, shaping Olympus's ecology and the skills of those within it. Finally, you pause at the edge of a sun-dappled grove, watching Artemis move among her wards with quiet precision. Her everyday life is a continuous blend of protection, observation, and subtle instruction, maintaining harmony in both living creatures and immortals. You realize that her influence is pervasive yet almost invisible, teaching attentiveness, skill, and ethical stewardship through routine action, precise movement, and quiet guidance. You wander toward the sparkling waters where Poseidon spends much of his day, and the shift in energy is immediate. The smell of salt, the distant crash of waves, and the steady rhythm of tide-like motion fills the air. The mainstream historical fact: Poseidon is the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, wielding influence over both water and land. Observing him, you see that his everyday life is a constant blend of oversight, calibration, and occasional dramatic intervention, balancing natural forces with subtle, continuous attention. A quirky detail. Fringe myths suggest Poseidon keeps miniature whirlpools or tidal eddies under his control, using them to entertain himself or train minor deities in fluid dynamics and adaptation. You watch a tiny vortex spinning in a calm pool, gently lifting a leaf and rotating it in intricate patterns, and you realize that even play is a form of observation, experimentation, and influence. Historians still argue whether Poseidon's mythic association with earthquakes and storms reflects early Greek awareness of natural phenomena or symbolic representations of chaos and unpredictability. Standing here, you sense both. Practical management of natural elements intertwined with narrative depictions of temper and power, shaping how gods and mortals alike perceive the world. Poseidon moves along a terrace of shallow pools, adjusting currents with the flick of his trident. Minor deities ripple through the water. Following currents he subtly alters, learning flow, timing, and adaptation. Fringe sources suggest these exercises are informal yet precise lessons in control, observation, and responsiveness, embedding understanding of forces into physical experience. You watch a small water nymph struggle to navigate a suddenly shifting stream, then adjust smoothly under his guidance, a miniature test of agility and focus. Nearby, horses graze by a tidal basin, their manes glistening with salt water. Poseidon runs a hand through a stallion's mane, and the animal aligns itself perfectly, responding not only to touch, but to subtle magical cues. The mainstream fact: Poseidon was closely associated with horses, often credited with their creation or training. Observing this, you feel the connection between motion, strength, and elemental power, an everyday orchestration of skill, patience, and oversight. A minor deity fumbles with a floating raft, and Poseidon tilts the water subtly, guiding it to stability without overtly taking control. Fringe myths claim he occasionally orchestrates minor challenges like shifting currents or rogue waves to test attentiveness and adaptability, embedding lessons within routine action. You notice how even imperceptible adjustments ripple outward, shaping behavior and experience across space. By mid-morning, the waters shimmer with constant motion, small whirlpools, gentle waves, and currents flowing in deliberate patterns. Poseidon oversees each fluctuation, ensuring harmony, safety, and instruction are maintained simultaneously. Fringe tales suggest some minor deities feel subtle emotional shifts based on the direction, speed, and intensity of the water, a testament to the pervasive yet nuanced influence of his everyday routines. You drift along the edge of a pool where Poseidon monitors underwater formations, adjusting rocks, corals, and aquatic plant life. The mainstream fact: myths often depict him as shaping seascapes with care and power, whether for practical or symbolic purposes. You see how small, deliberate interventions maintain both beauty and functionality, reinforcing an ongoing balance between chaos and order. A quirky observation. Some fringe stories claim that Poseidon occasionally allows dolphins, seals, or other sea creatures to interact with minor deities as playful partners or instructors in navigation, perception, and coordination. You watch a pod of dolphins leap through currents, their movements synchronized with subtle magical cues, a combination of training, entertainment, and demonstration. By late morning, Poseidon walks along the shorelines, interacting with minor spirits, adjusting tides, and ensuring his aquatic domain maintains balance. The water seems alive with both magic and order, a constantly shifting matrix that responds to his observation and intervention. Historians still debate whether these myths reflect early Greek maritime knowledge or symbolic reflections on power, unpredictability, and influence. But here, the logic of control is clear and mesmerizing. You notice how even small waves, eddies, or ripples align with his movements, creating an invisible grid of influence. Fringe sources suggest he occasionally tests reaction, foresight, or coordination, embedding lessons into environmental conditions that appear random to casual observers. You see the precision, subtlety, and artistry of his everyday tasks, combining oversight, play, and practical instruction. Finally, you pause on a sunlit terrace above the pools, watching Poseidon raise his trident and direct a small, controlled wave across a basin. The ripple extends, nudging objects, animals, and minor deities into alignment without force. His everyday life is an elegant, continuous exercise in observation, calibration, and influence, an ever-present, unspoken teaching of balance, power, and responsiveness that threads through Olympus and beyond. You drift toward the lofty halls where Apollo is already engaged, the light of late morning catching his golden hair and shimmering robes. The air vibrates faintly with music and the faint scent of laurel, as if the very atmosphere hums in anticipation of his actions. The mainstream historical fact: Apollo is the god of music, prophecy, healing, and the sun's later arc, often depicted as an embodiment of harmony, skill, and foresight. Observing him, you realize his everyday life is a delicate blend of artistic creation, guidance, and the subtle weaving of influence across mortals and immortals alike. A quirky detail: fringe myths suggest Apollo sometimes plays melodies that invisibly guide moods, emotions, or even minor events, his lyre acting as both instrument and invisible orchestrator. You notice a minor deity's steps subtly align with his music, adjusting posture and movement without conscious thought, a quiet choreography of attention and learning. Historians still argue whether Apollo's musical and prophetic roles reflect literal ritual practices, cultural ideals, or symbolic narratives of order and perception. Standing here, you feel all three converging. His daily activity is simultaneously practical, symbolic, and subtly influential. Apollo strums his golden lyre, each note vibrating through the hall and into the courtyard outside. Minor deities pause mid-task, subtly adjusting gestures, expressions, and movements, harmonizing with the rhythm. Fringe accounts suggest these small adjustments function as both meditation and training in attentiveness, emotional regulation, and spatial awareness. You notice how even the air seems charged, carrying resonance and energy that guides perception and behavior. Nearby, tablets and scrolls lie open, displaying intricate calculations, musical notations, and predictions of both mortal and divine events. Apollo reviews them carefully, occasionally marking a subtle correction or rearrangement. The mainstream fact: Greek myth consistently portrays Apollo as a god of foresight and measurement, applying observation to music, prophecy, and order. You sense the precision with which he balances creativity, observation, and instruction in his daily routine. A minor deity fumbles with a ceremonial instrument, and Apollo steps closer, guiding with a tilt of the head and a subtle adjustment of the fingers. Fringe myths claim he frequently embeds micro-lessons within such interactions, teaching rhythm, perception, and coordination without overt instruction. Observing this, you feel the elegance of indirect mentorship, learning embedded in action, and attentive observation. By mid-morning, the courtyard hums softly with harmonized energy. Birds, wind chimes, and minor deities respond to subtle musical cues. Fringe tales suggest that Apollo occasionally adjusts the timing of these cues to test responsiveness, attention, and emotional calibration, creating a dynamic yet controlled environment for learning. You watch a breeze carry a note from the lyre, aligning leaves, ripples in water, and the movements of tiny attendants in perfect synchronicity. Nearby, a small ritual fire flickers, releasing aromatic smoke as Apollo tunes instruments and calibrates magical resonance. The mainstream fact: music and ritual were often intertwined in Greek culture, and Apollo's role symbolizes both divine artistry and structured guidance. You notice the layered complexity. Melody guides perception, rhythm structures attention, and subtle influence teaches responsiveness. A fringe observation: some myths claim Apollo occasionally uses music to manipulate light, color, or perception subtly, affecting minor deities, judgments, and emotional states. You see small reflections glinting off polished surfaces in synchrony with his strumming, creating a sensory alignment that reinforces learning, awareness, and attentiveness. By late morning, minor deities have internalized his subtle cues, performing tasks in rhythm with his guidance while the air itself seems to hum with quiet instruction. Apollo's presence orchestrates a continuous feedback loop of observation, adjustment, and subtle mentorship, shaping both immediate actions and long-term attentional skills. Historians still debate whether these myths were intended literally or allegorically, but the logic of influence is unmistakable. Finally, you pause near a sunlit terrace, observing Apollo pluck a final chord and let it resonate across the courtyard. The sound carries, touching leaves, water, and attentive deities alike, shaping behavior and perception without overt intervention. His everyday life is a seamless interweaving of art, instruction, and subtle influence, maintaining harmony, foresight, and attentiveness across Olympus. Watching him, you realize that the divine can teach not only through words or direct action, but through rhythm, resonance, and careful orchestration of environment and attention. You ascend toward the misty heights where Hephaestus labors, the air tinged with smoke, metal, and the faint warmth of glowing furnaces. Sparks drift like fireflies, illuminating intricate machinery and delicate tools scattered across benches and platforms. The mainstream historical fact. Hephaestus is the god of blacksmiths, metallurgy, and craftsmanship, often depicted as both ingenious and tireless, creating divine artifacts and inventions. Observing him, you realize his everyday life is a careful balance of labor, precision, and creative problem-solving, blending artistry, technical skill, and subtle mentorship. A quirky detail. Fringe myths suggest Hephaestus occasionally embeds playful surprises into his creations, tiny moving elements or illusory effects that only attentive minor deities notice. You see a small automaton spin delicately on its axis, winking when you approach, as if acknowledging your observation. His workspace is alive with motion, invention, and subtle interactions that combine instruction with amusement. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's association with volcanic and industrial activity reflects early Greek metallurgical practices, or symbolic depictions of creativity and industriousness. Standing here, you feel both practical labor intertwined with imaginative experimentation and invisible teaching. Hephaestus hammers a glowing piece of metal, sparks flying in measured arcs. Minor deities scurry to adjust tongs, quench tools, or prepare alloys. Fringe sources suggest he subtly tests dexterity, patience, and observational skills, turning ordinary craft into exercises of focus and learning. You notice a minor deity attempting to replicate a small mechanism, fumbling slightly, and he intervenes with a flick of a wrist, guiding both precision and insight without a word. Nearby, a molten pool of metal reflects the golden light of the furnaces. Hephaestus dips tools and components carefully, adjusting temperature and alignment with painstaking attention. The mainstream fact. Myths depict him as a master of both raw materials and intricate design, capable of producing objects of extraordinary function and beauty. You sense how every motion is purposeful, each adjustment a combination of technical mastery and subtle instruction. A minor deity accidentally misaligns a mechanical arm, and Hephaestus steps in, not with reprimand but with a gentle push and shift of the joint, correcting the motion while leaving the learning intact. Fringe tales claim he often designed such errors intentionally, allowing apprentices to discover solutions, reinforcing problem-solving, observation, and independent thought. You marvel at the elegance of his pedagogical method, where creation itself is a teacher. By mid-morning, the forge hums with continuous energy. Sparks, molten metal, and moving mechanisms create a dynamic orchestra of labor and instruction. Fringe myths suggest some of these creations subtly influence other deities, attention, or perception, embedding lessons or magical cues in everyday objects. You watch a minor deity adjust a set of miniature wheels, and they move seamlessly, almost intuitively, guided by invisible design and subtle nudges. Nearby, a collection of delicate automata and tools seems to shift slightly, as if responding to observation. The mainstream fact: Greek mythology often highlights Hephaestus's ingenuity in creating objects that combine utility, aesthetics, and magical function. You notice that his daily life integrates craft, instruction, and subtle manipulation of environment, a continuous exercise in precision and influence. A fringe observation: some myths suggest Hephaestus occasionally incorporates puzzles or hidden mechanisms within his creations, turning routine maintenance or interaction into lessons in attentiveness, dexterity, and creative thinking. You see a small device spring to life when a lever is touched in a precise sequence, demonstrating a blend of artistry, play, and instruction. By late morning, the forge and workshops are alive with motion, but every movement is purposeful and observed. Hephaestus coordinates this complex activity with a subtle gaze and small gestures, maintaining efficiency, instruction, and creative experimentation simultaneously. Historians still debate whether Hephaestus symbolizes practical labor or allegorical creativity, but the logic of daily operation is unmistakable. Continuous refinement, subtle teaching, and the orchestration of living systems. Finally, you pause at the edge of a platform, watching Hephaestus lift a finished artifact, inspect its alignment, and make the tiniest adjustment. Sparks drift into the air, carrying the rhythm of labor, attention, and subtle guidance. His everyday life is a constant interplay of creation, precision, and mentorship, crafting both objects and understanding in a seamless, quiet mastery that shapes Olympus and teaches through example, observation, and interaction. You make your way toward the serene gardens where Demeter tends to plants, flowers, and carefully arranged groves, and the scent of fertile soil, ripening fruit, and fresh blossoms immediately envelops you. The mainstream historical fact: Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, grain, and harvest, responsible for ensuring fertility and abundance both on Olympus and among mortals. Observing her, you realize that her everyday life revolves around careful observation, patient cultivation, and subtle guidance of growth, blending practical care with rhythmic, almost meditative instruction. A quirky detail: fringe myths suggest some of her plants are minor spirits in disguise, responding to her touch or subtle gestures, and even playing pranks on inattentive minor deities. You notice a vine curl in an unusual pattern, seemingly acknowledging her presence or nudging a minor deity toward a task they hadn't noticed before. It's a quiet, playful interactivity embedded into everyday labor. Historians still argue whether Demeter's mythology reflects literal early Greek agrarian practices or allegorical lessons on fertility, patience, and seasonal cycles. Standing here, you feel both. Her work is practical, but the symbolism imbues every movement with meaning and subtle teaching. Demeter kneels to examine soil, turning it gently and sprinkling a faint trace of golden dust that seems to encourage growth in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Minor deities move about, assisting with planting, pruning, and watering, aligning their actions with her deliberate rhythm. Fringe sources suggest these motions also cultivate attentiveness and dexterity, teaching observation, timing, and care through active engagement rather than instruction. Nearby, a small grove of wheat rustles in a controlled breeze, responding to subtle adjustments of sunlight and irrigation. The mainstream fact: Greek myths frequently emphasize her influence over both plant life and the cycles of seasons, underscoring her essential role in sustenance and order. You notice that even slight misalignment or neglect prompts gentle corrective interventions, demonstrating the importance of attention and subtle guidance. A minor deity fumbles with a seedling, and Demeter gently nudges it into proper alignment, allowing it to root fully. Fringe tales claim that she occasionally introduces subtle irregularities, twists in a vine, a shift in soil composition, to teach problem-solving adaptability, and observation skills. You sense that even the quietest acts carry layered significance, blending nurturing, discipline, and education seamlessly. By mid-morning, the gardens hum with coordinated motion. Pollinating insects, minor deities, and sunlight work in concert, each element responding subtly to her attention. Fringe myths suggest some mortals might unconsciously feel the influence of these divine rhythms, perceiving fertility, abundance, or readiness for harvest without understanding the source. You watch as tiny sprouts adjust in alignment with her gestures, a living demonstration of subtle, continuous influence. Nearby, a small fountain trickles, its water reflecting the sky and carrying light into shaded groves. Demeter dips her hands into the pool, adjusting flow and clarity in ways almost imperceptible. The mainstream fact: her dominion over agriculture often involved subtle manipulation of natural forces, whether mythically or symbolically. Observing this, you see how deliberate attention ensures vitality, productivity, and harmony across her domain. A fringe observation: some minor myths claim Demeter communicates subtle moral or practical lessons through plant growth patterns, using her gardens as a living classroom. You notice a vine arching toward the sun, almost like a visual cue, guiding a minor deity's movements as they tend nearby plants. Her everyday life integrates instruction, care, and observation seamlessly, turning labor into education and engagement. By late morning, the gardens are a living, interactive system. Plants respond to care, minor deities respond to cues, and subtle cycles of growth, light, and attention maintain harmony. Historians still debate whether these myths were purely symbolic or rooted in ritualized agricultural practices, but here, the logic is clear. Her influence flows continuously through action, observation, and subtle guidance. Finally, you pause on a terrace overlooking ripening fields and flowering groves, watching Demeter adjust a single branch, the sunlight catching the leaves and revealing their intricate patterns. Her everyday life is a seamless rhythm of observation, cultivation, and subtle mentorship, preserving fertility, order, and attention in both nature and the divine household. You feel the quiet power of routine, patience, and presence. Through simple acts of care, she maintains life, teaches attentiveness, and ensures harmony across Olympus and beyond. You drift toward the high chambers where Zeus presides, the air charged with a subtle hum of authority and power that seems to vibrate beneath your feet. Lightning motifs glint faintly across the marble floor, and distant echoes of thunder rumble softly, a constant, low-frequency reminder of his presence. The mainstream historical fact: Zeus is the king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, and god of the sky and thunder, overseeing both divine and mortal affairs with a combination of authority, judgment, and occasional intervention. Observing him, you realize that his everyday life is a continuous orchestration of observation, influence, and subtle governance, balancing oversight with personal engagement. A quirky detail: fringe myths suggest Zeus sometimes transforms minor objects into tiny lightning simulations, testing attentiveness or reaction times in minor deities. You watch a small ornamental sphere spark and hover briefly, eliciting a careful adjustment from a nearby attendant, and realize that even play and testing are integrated into his daily routine. Historians still argue whether Zeus's mythic authority represents literal religious hierarchy, political allegory, or symbolic embodiment of cosmic order. Standing here, you feel all three intertwined. Authority exercised not only through decrees but through continuous, attentive presence and subtle adjustments to behavior, perception, and circumstance. Zeus strides across his chambers, gesturing occasionally, and minor deities align themselves instinctively with his patterns of motion and attention. Fringe sources suggest that he sometimes engineers small accidental events, sparks, shifting light, or gusts of wind, to gauge responsiveness, judgment, or loyalty, creating micro-lessons within the fabric of everyday existence. You notice a minor deity pause mid-step, recalibrating movements almost unconsciously, a reflection of his pervasive influence. Nearby, scrolls and tablets record both mundane and cosmic matters. Zeus reviews them carefully, marking subtle adjustments or issuing silent guidance. The mainstream fact: Greek myths consistently portray him as both arbiter and observer, responsible for maintaining balance and authority across realms. You sense the weight and nuance in each action. His attention is never idle, every gesture calibrated to preserve structure, fairness, and order. A minor deity hesitates over a task, and Zeus subtly shifts a hand or brow, nudging them toward the proper action without words. Fringe tales suggest this indirect teaching ensures attentiveness, self-reliance, and adaptability. You see that even minor interactions carry both instruction and consequence, making his everyday presence both governing and pedagogical. By mid-morning, the chambers hum with coordinated energy. Minor deities move fluidly, tasks unfold with quiet precision, and even the air seems charged with subtle signals of attention and expectation. Fringe myths claim Zeus can subtly influence events beyond Olympus with minimal motion, a ripple effect of observation, intention, and authority that aligns mortals and gods alike. Nearby, a small terrace overlooks the vast expanse of Olympus, and Zeus surveys the mountain, noting adjustments in minor activities, weather patterns, and celestial movements. The mainstream fact: myths often emphasize his vigilance and perception, responsible for maintaining both natural and divine order. You notice how observation alone suffices for minor corrections, a combination of attentiveness, influence, and subtle calibration. A quirky detail: some fringe myths claim Zeus occasionally orchestrates playful surprises, small lightning arcs, shifting shadows, or moving clouds, to gauge attention, decision-making, and perceptual skill in minor deities. You watch as a small flash arcs harmlessly over a garden, prompting immediate adjustment in a nearby nymph's positioning, a silent lesson embedded in routine life. By late morning, Zeus moves among courtyards, terraces, and halls, adjusting, observing, and guiding with minimal overt action. Historians still debate whether these myths are symbolic or narrative exaggeration, but the operational reality is clear. His everyday life blends supervision, subtle teaching, and strategic influence, maintaining the mountain's balance and continuity. Finally, you pause at the pinnacle, observing Zeus resting momentarily on a golden throne, eyes scanning the expanse. His everyday life is a continuous rhythm of attention, calibration, and subtle mentorship, preserving authority, balance, and attentiveness across Olympus. You sense the quiet majesty of his routine. Through observation, intervention, and small gestures, he orchestrates a living system of influence, ensuring that the mountain, its inhabitants, and even the world below remain in harmony, learning, and alignment. You lean back, letting the rhythm of Olympus settle around you. The golden light of Helios fades into soft warmth, the rustle of Artemis's forest calms, and the hum of Hephaestus's forge drifts faintly into memory. The mountains, temples, gardens, and courtyards all exhale together, a symphony of subtle motion and attentive presence. You feel the pulse of the gods, daily routines, their guidance, play, and instruction woven invisibly into the fabric of Olympus. There's a quiet magic in this observation, the subtle teaching of Hermes' swiftness, Athena's strategic oversight, Poseidon's flowing currents, and Demeter's patient cultivation. Even Zeus's watchful gaze seems less imposing now, more a gentle hand keeping everything in alignment. You begin to understand that these seemingly grandiose lives are threaded with the same small, continuous gestures that shape the world, whether through attention, precision, or care. As you drift further, the mountain softens. The sounds of minor deities, animals, and elements blend into a gentle lullaby, a rhythm of learning and harmony. You remember fleeting glimpses, Apollo's music-guiding motions, Artemis's careful steps, the playful sparks of Hephaestus, and the slow patience of Demeter tending her gardens. Each acts as a quiet teacher, shaping not through force but through presence, influence, and subtle encouragement. Let your mind float with the mountain now, the rhythm of divine life fading into calm. Sense the lessons embedded in routine, the quiet majesty of daily attention, and the soft pulse of Olympus as it rests, ready to begin again with tomorrow's light. Breathe in this calm, carry it with you, and allow the world of gods and mortals to dissolve gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.